Hello everyone, Omni-Sensei here with What If I Were Reborn in MHA as DABI, Part 5. If you enjoy this content, smash the like button. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description.
After talking it through with Midoriya, they came up with something. DABI kept the explanation vague, as he couldn't exactly say what he was actually trying to do. Unlock latent quirks within One for All. Because standing in a training ground surrounded by people who didn't know the full picture, that sentence would have raised more questions than he had answers for. Even All Might, who knew everything, was watching with an expression that said he wasn't sure this was going to work but didn't have a better idea. What DABI explained it simply. He needed Midoriya pushed into a situation where full cowling wasn't enough. His body recognized on instinct that his current abilities couldn't save him, driving a desperate need for something new, something he didn't even know he possessed, until whatever lay dormant inside him had no choice but to respond. Bakugo stood apart, and even though no one had explained anything to him directly, he had pieced together enough to know something unusual was happening with Midoriya's quirk. Same rules as before, DABI said, stepping back outside the ring. Midoriya, no full cowling or breathing techniques this time, either. And Bakugo, don't just blast him. Focus on speed. I want you everywhere at once. Vary your angles, shift your vectors mid-air. Don't let him settle into a rhythm. A jagged, dangerous grin cut across Bakugo's face. He didn't need to be told twice. You want me to run circles around the nerd? Just watch. The violence that followed was brutal again. Bakugo moved, cutting in at multiple angles. He never attacked in a straight line, using sharp, percussive blasts from his palms to redirect his momentum mid-stride. He appeared on Midoriya's left before the boy could even complete a turn, a strike catching him clean across the ribs. By the time Midoriya's body registered the impact, Bakugo was already gone. Another explosion launching him into a vector shift that brought him screaming in from behind. The confined ring only proved even more difficult for Midoriya, leaving no room to retreat. Midoriya tracked it all, his eyes following each movement as his mind mapped trajectories, calculated angles, and identified openings with perfect accuracy. Every detail understood and outcome anticipated. By the time he committed to a block, Bakugo had already pivoted. A strike caught his shoulder. He steadied himself and reset, only to be hit again from the right, his attempted dodge lagging just enough for another clean blow to land. A minute passed, then another, and Midoriya hadn't landed a single hit. He hadn't even come close. The ring worked exactly as intended, leaving him trapped with no room to maneuver, every exchange ending in blows he saw coming but couldn't avoid. By the third minute, blood trickled from a cut above his eye where Bakugo's palm had grazed him, his left arm already bruised from shoulder to wrist. During the fourth and fifth, nothing changed. One for All remained unresponsive, and the fight had reduced itself to a one-sided beating. Off to the side, DABI's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. All Might's skinny hands clenched deep in his pockets. His body jerked forward with each impact before he forced himself still. Aizawa stood with his goggles ready, his gaze settling on DABI, the question clear without words. How much longer would this continue? DABI didn't look back. His eyes were locked on Midoriya as the 6th minute bled into the 7th. He kept knocking him down only to watch him drag himself back up, each recovery slower, each impact heavier, yet nothing produced what DABI was waiting for. At 7 minutes, Midoriya collapsed again and remained on his hands and knees for a long second, arms trembling as blood from the cut above his eye fell in steady drops onto the concrete. Behind Aizawa, Shinso watched in silence, his expression blank while his eyes moved between Midoriya and DABI, as if trying to grasp something he could sense but not quite see. By the 8th minute, the exercise was clearly failing, the realization settling cold in DABI's chest. He had misjudged it. Whatever had triggered the vestige connection before, The precise mix of desperation, emotion, and pressure was absent. The setup was too controlled, deliberate, and clearly a test for Midoriya's instincts to mistake for real danger. It might come only on its own terms, on one for all's timing rather than his. He was about to call it off. Then Bakugo drove Midoriya backward with a brutal shove. Midoriya staggered, caught himself, and stayed upright. Bakugo stood there, breathing through his nose, palms faintly sparking at his sides. His expression stripped of anger and contempt, replaced by something worse. Boredom. He had expected a fight but found a chore instead, and the look on his face made it clear. Izuku Midoriya, without his borrowed power, was exactly what Bakugo had always believed. Insignificant, background, a pebble on the road. 9 minutes in, Bakugo surged forward again, the restraint he had maintained slipping just enough for his attacks to come faster and hit harder, each explosion carrying more force as frustration drove him to escalate against a fight that gave nothing back. Midoriya kept dropping. He was forcing himself up, his body long past its limits and held together only by a stubborn reflex that refused to let him stay down. Bakugo noticed the subtle shift in him. The constant analysis, muttering, and eyes tracking angles had all gone quiet, as if something was powering down and leaving behind what was not a strategy. The clean right snapped Midoriya's head sideways and sent him into the firewall. Heat seared through his scorched shirt as he bounced off the perimeter, dropped to one knee, and dragged himself back to his feet. H took another strike, a left hook to the same battered ribs, something inside shifting wrong as he doubled over, gasping, copper filling his mouth, yet rising once more. Bakugo stood a few feet away, barely winded or touched, wearing the same look Midoriya had known since childhood. It was the quiet certainty of distance, of one standing above while the other remained below, while Midoriya's mind had gone still. The battle awareness was gone and replaced by something older than everything that had reshaped his life, a memory rooted at the beginning of always chasing and never closing the gap. He had gained power, trained under pro-heroes, fought villains, and broken and rebuilt himself. Yet here, with everything reduced to its core, the truth remained unchanged. Bakugo stood while he struggled to stay on his feet. And not waiting anymore, Bakugo moved again, faster than at any point before. His right palm led the charge, the explosion already building, that familiar, arrogant grin etched onto his face. Midoriya saw the strike coming with agonizing clarity. He mapped the angle, the timing, and the trajectory, arriving at a singular, crushing certainty. He couldn't move in time. He would take the hit, he would fall again, and Bakugo would still be standing over him, looking down. Then, something in his chest finally snapped. It didn't come from thought or intent, but from the pressure that had been building for years finally breaking past its limit, tearing loose without warning or control. Thick, serpentine cords of crackling green energy erupted from his hands. They slammed into the reinforced concrete on either side of him with the force of falling girders, fracturing the floor instantly. The tendrils flexed, anchored, and launched him forward in a singular motion. Midoriya vanished. He moved so fast the air collapsed inward with a sharp, concussive pop, leaving Bakugo's explosion to tear through nothing but empty space. For a split second, genuine shock shattered Bakugo's composure. His head snapped side to side, searching for a target that had been right in front of him a heartbeat ago. He found him on the opposite end of the ring. Midoriya stood there, barely steady with shaking legs and a swaying frame. The tendrils still anchored beside him like thick cables alive with green lightning, pulsing with something that didn't look human. Midoriya stared at his own hands, his eyes wide and terrified by the power that had emerged without his control. Bakugo turned slowly. His eyes tracked from the fractured floor to the living weapons sprouting from Midoriya's arms. A single bead of sweat slid down his temple. Ha! Bakugo's voice was lower than usual, stripped of its typical roar. So you were holding out on me. The jagged grin returned, slower and wider this time. Another trick. Huh? You always do this, Deku. Pulling something out at the last second. It's so damn annoying. He moved before finishing the thought, because hesitation wasn't in his nature. Stop! He took one step forward, and Midoriya screamed. The tendrils multiplied in an instant and erupted from his arms. Wild, whipping lashes that tore into the air in every direction. Each one moved with its own independent, predatory logic, ignoring every frantic command Midoriya tried to give them. They slammed into the ground, lashed at the air, and cracked against the firewall hard enough to scatter the blue flames across the concrete. I can't! Midoriya's body jerked violently as the cords pulled him in 4 different directions at once, lifting his feet off the ground. I can't control it. Kaken, move. Everyone, get away from me. A rogue tendril snapped toward Bakugo, faster than the attack he had been preparing. Bakugo saw it coming. He primed his palms to blast himself clear, but the strike was already on top of him, aimed squarely at his chest. Before it could connect, a hand caught the back of Bakugo's collar. He was yanked backward with bone-jarring force, dragged several meters clear as the tendril tore through the space he had occupied. DABI stood beside him, having crossed the distance from the perimeter to the ring in the blink of an eye. He released Bakugo's collar. However, his eyes had a satisfied interest. A tendril whipped past his ear, close enough to singe his hair, and he simply leaned aside without even looking. "Took you long enough," DABI said, his voice steady over the roar of the lashing power. "Though, you might want to dial it down, kid." And obviously, Midoriya couldn't. Aizawa stepped forward with goggles raised, eyes glowing red as he prepared to shut it down. But DABI lifted a hand to stop him. "Wait," he said. "Give him a minute." Aizawa's look made it clear that this had better justify the collateral damage to his student and the building. "Oi, kid." DABI's voice cut through the localized hurricane. "Stop fighting it." "What?" Midoriya's voice was a panicked shred of its usual self, his feet dangling inches off the floor as a coil of green energy tightened around his waist. "Stop resisting the flow. Let it go." If I let go my hands." Midoriya stared at them in panic as the tendrils surged between his fingers and coiled up his arms, slipping through every attempt to contain them. "It won't stop. I am here, and Aizawa's too." DABI cut in, his tone flat. "Open your hands and let it go." Midoriya's eyes were blown wide, darting from DABI's calm posture to Aizawa behind him, ready to use his quirk. "Still, I can't," Midoriya sobbed, his knuckles white as he tried to ball his fists against the pressure. "If I let go, I don't know what happens to everyone else. I will hurt you. You think I am that easy to kill?" DABI countered, taking a step into the fray. "Stop being a martyr for 5 seconds and just let go." Midoriya let out a ragged, broken sound. Half scream, half sob, and his fingers finally unfurled. Immediately, the terrain that had been there a second ago was gone. Dozens of thick, pitch-black tendrils laced with green static erupted from his palms, a violent, organic web that claimed every inch of the surroundings. Midoriya was hoisted into the air, his body jerking taut as the power used him as a literal anchor. DABI didn't stop as he moved through the thrashing chaos with a loose-limbed grace, slipping past lashes that could have decapitated him. He swiped a stray cord away with the back of his hand, ignoring the way the energy scorched his skin. "Sensei, get back!" Midoriya yelled, his voice cracking. It's pulling me." "Then pull back." DABI snapped, ducking a snap aimed at his throat. "Stop treating it like an invader. It's your power, isn't it? It's coming out of your skin, fueled by your heart. Tell it where to go or it's going to decide for you." DABI winced as a tendril caught his shoulder, tearing the fabric and drawing blood, but he didn't even break his stride. Behind him, Bakugo stood where he had been dropped, completely still, with no grin or scowl, just focused attention as he absorbed every detail. Midoriya was evolving again, pulling out another power at the last second, and the familiar frustration stirred. That old burn of being outpaced. Yet beneath it was something newer, sharper, an urge to face this version of him head-on once he could control it. It's too much. Everything's going dark. The tendrils began to slow as Midoriya's reserves burned out, the sustained output draining what little he had left. Stay with me. Dabi's voice lowered, suddenly right beneath him. He was standing in the eye of the storm, looking up at the sky. Don't you dare pass out now. Feel the weight of it and remember this feeling so the next time it knocks, you're the one who opens the door. As if responding to Dabi's command, the storm began to break. Each strand grew shorter, appearing less frequently. The web of green energy that had claimed the training ground started dissolving from the edges, retracting toward the boy at the center. Midoriya's arms dropped as the last tendrils slipped back into his palms, the energy retreating beneath his skin to whatever place it had emerged from. His fingers twitched, curled, and stilled while his body swayed, vision unfocused, knees giving out beneath him. Dabi was there before he could crumple, catching him. One arm steadied the boy's shoulders while the other supported his head. Midoriya felt weightless, his uniform drenched in sweat and his frame shivering with a post-adrenal collapse. His heartbeat was frantic and irregular, while his hands were still radiating a fierce, unnatural heat. Good job, kid, Dabi said, lowering him carefully. Take a rest. Midoriya's lips moved faintly, his fingers twitching as the echo of that power lingered in his nerves. Whatever he tried to say never formed, exhaustion overtaking him before a word could surface. Dabi watched him for a moment, then looked at his own palm. Even though nothing was serious, he actually sustained some damage. He glanced up at All Might, who was sprinting down. He is out, but he should be fine given a few minutes, Dabi said, standing up as the former symbol of peace skidded to a halt. Tashinori, you might want to figure out what else is inside it before he drowns. All Might flinched at the use of his name, but his focus was already on the boy. Dabi stepped over a jagged fissure in the concrete, his boots crunching on the dust of what used to be a floor as he approached Aizawa. Sorry about the damage. Dabi moved to Aizawa. We expected the outcome, Aizawa replied, though he didn't look away from Midoriya. But make sure to write the incident report. Dabi offered a non-committal grunt and turned toward the exit. He stopped, however, when his gaze hit the far wall. Meanwhile, inside the consciousness of Midoriya, the green mist was everywhere. Midoriya was paralyzed. It was the same heavy, suffocating stillness he had experienced in the hospital. The figure stepped out of the dark. Huge. It was the first thing he noticed. He was built like a fortress. Wide-shouldered, barrel-chested, with a square jaw, small blue eyes twinkled from a face with no eyebrows, topped by a bald head and a short, bristly beard. He was wearing a leather jacket, open, no shirt underneath, showing a muscular torso crossed with old scars. Golden goggles sat on his forehead, a bandolier wrapped across his chest, yellow shoulder pads. He was grinning, huge, wide, taking up most of his face. MHA? The man laughed, the way he was built, big, loud, with zero interest in volume control. So this is the ninth. Let me get a look at you, kid. He leaned in, his face inches from Midoriya's, squinting and inspecting. He pulled back, crossed his massive arms, and gave a single, sharp nod of approval. Good, good. I like this one. He jabbed a thick finger toward Midoriya's chest. You feel that? That raw pull in your gut? That surge that came out of you back there? That's mine, kid. That was my power coming through. And it's manifesting way earlier than any of us banked on. He threw his head back and laughed. Then, his grin flickered, shifting into something more pointed. He glanced over his shoulder, peering into the deeper, suffocating shadows behind him. Two figures stood there, separate from the shifting silhouettes of the others. Their outlines were sharp, crystalline, and hauntingly present, but they were turned away. "Oi, Kudo! Bruce!" The big man cupped his hands around his mouth, shouting as if trying to wake the dead. "You seeing this? The kid just unleashed Black Whip on his first real go. You two are still gonna stand over there acting like you're too elite for the guest of honor?" There was no response. Yeah, keep pouting. You're missing the show." He waved a dismissive, meat hook of a hand at them before turning back to Midoriya. "Don't sweat those two. They will come around. Eventually. Probably. They have their reasons for being stubborn, but don't let it bother you." Midoriya didn't know who Kudo and Bruce were. Couldn't ask because his mouth was sealed. But he could see the two figures standing in the dark with their backs half turned, and everything about their posture said the same thing. "We're not ready to accept you." The big man planted his massive fists on his hips, his grin shifting into something more serious. "But," he thundered, his voice somehow finding a higher gear, "don't think this means you get to the coast. You hear me? What happened out there was just a start. Just a start. Something bigger is coming, and you are nowhere near ready for it." He held up a finger. "Two things. First, you train. Harder than you've ever imagined. I don't care if you've been through hell. Go deeper. I don't care if your muscles are screaming. Ignore him. Shape up, because good enough is gonna get you killed." The second finger joined the first. "And from here on out, you don't use this power casually. You don't pull on one for all every time you stub your toe. Every time you activate it, you're drawing on all of us. That's not something you do carelessly." Midoriya's mind was racing. He couldn't speak or ask questions, but his brain was doing what it always did. Cataloging, analyzing, and connecting. This man was one of the previous users of One for All. He was inside the power itself. The vestiges weren't just echoes or memories. They were here, living inside the quirk, watching, waiting. The big man stopped mid-sentence. He leaned in again, his small blue eyes squinting at Midoriya's face with sudden, confused intensity. "Hey, wait, where the hell is your mouth?" He stared at the thick, green mist masking Midoriya's lower face. He reached out as if to poke it, then pulled back, scratching the back of his bald head. "Kid, I have been shouting at you for like 2 minutes and you can't even talk back? Seriously?" He let out a huff of realization, looking genuinely embarrassed. "Man, okay, that's actually pretty rude of me. My mistake, ninth. Guess the connection's still a bit buggy." He sighed, his booming energy settling into something more earnest. Running out of time. He flexed his fingers, watching the smoke drift. "Figures. It's the first real conversation and I gotta rush it." He looked back at Midoriya. The grin was still there, but something underneath it had gotten serious. "All right, listen up, because I can only say this once. That power you used out there, the green stuff, the tendrils, that's my quirk. Black Whip." He raised one hand and dark tendrils erupted from his forearm, thick and controlled, wrapping around his fist in a clean, disciplined demonstration. Then he dismissed them. "But what came out of you isn't the same as what I had. It's evolved and gotten stronger by a lot, if I do say so." He looked at his own hands. The edges of his fingers were dissolving, breaking apart into wisps of reddish smoke that curled upward and disappeared. One for All has been growing, ripening, for 8 generations. Now it's finally reached the singularity. It's not just a strength booster anymore. The seeds of our individual quirks that were buried deep inside are finally starting to sprout. When you were fighting that blonde kid and getting your ass handed to him. And right at the end, when you were cornered, you wanted something so bad your whole body screamed for it. The power answered. He pointed at Midoriya's chest. "That's how it works. One for all responds to what you feel. You use it in anger and it comes out angry. You use it in desperation, it comes out desperate. Wild, uncontrolled, dangerous to everyone around you, including yourself. He paused. What you need isn't more power. You've got plenty of that. What you need is control over your body, yeah, but more than that, over your emotions and your heart. If you let your anger or your fear take control, you won't be a hero. You will just be a disaster waiting to happen. More smoke, his forearm was starting to dissolve now. And for what it's worth, his voice dropped. For a first-timer using Black Whip, that was outstanding. And the fact that you didn't tear yourself apart or hurt anyone around you, that's remarkable. You will get the hang of the rest, give it time. He grinned again. That breathing thing you had learned, the concentration technique, so keep doing it, that's the key. Control your breath, heart, and power. You're already halfway there. His legs were gone, and his torso was dissolving fast now, the red smoke pouring off him like he was being unmade from the bottom up. Okay, last thing. Pay attention because this is the important part. His voice was getting fainter, but he was still pushing volume into it through sheer force of personality. What happened today is just the first one. You've got 6 more quirks from 6 more users, all of them living inside One for All, waiting to manifest. And the world isn't going to wait around while you figure it out. The great evil is moving. We don't have time for you to be a passenger anymore. You've got to be the one in the driver's seat. His chest and neck were gone. His face was the last thing left. That wide grin and those small blue eyes floating in the dark. Control your heart. Master the power and earn the trust of everyone living inside you. The grin widened one last time. You're the one who's going to complete One for All, kid. A beat. Next time we talk, I better see a mouth on that face. Catch you on the flip side. He was gone. Midoriya hung in the dark, trapped in a green mist, his mind overloaded and his mouth still sealed shut. 6 more quirks. Outside, DABI and Aizawa decided it was best to take Midoriya to Recovery Girl, as the prior simply lifted him like a sack of bad and headed toward the exit. Behind them, Shinso stayed. He and Bakugo had already been dismissed for the day, yet he couldn't help watching Midoriya, his expression difficult to read. He had put Midoriya under his hypnosis quirk 3 times in the past hour in between his battles with Bakugo. He was also pretty curious if Midoriya had any trick up his sleeve, since he was the one who broke his brainwashing through sheer will during the sports festival. Now he just manifested an entirely new power out of nowhere. Shinso looked at his own hands, then back at Midoriya. He didn't say anything, as he adjusted the practice capture scarf around his neck and stepped back. At the far end of the training ground, Bakugo hadn't moved too, still standing where DABI had set him down after pulling him out of the tendril's path. Arms loose at his sides, bag resting on the ground, his face unnaturally still. It was wrong. Bakugo's expression was never empty. His normal face would be constantly shifting through annoyance, contempt, or that relentless competitive edge, but now it had gone quiet. He glanced at his hands, the bandages from the microsurgery mostly gone, leaving behind thin, pale scars across his palms and fingers where the skin had been retouched. They trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something tighter, more controlled. His gaze shifted back to Midoriya, who DABI was currently carrying toward the exit. So that was the new power. He had felt it the instant those tendrils came at him, the one DABI dragged him clear of. Even from afar, he could sense the force and the raw destructive power coursing through those green cables. And with the instinct of someone who had spent his entire life measuring strength, he knew what he had witnessed wasn't anywhere near its limit. It was going to grow significantly. His eyes moved to where DABI and All Might were having a secret discussion. So that had been the point of it all, he thought. The brainwashing, forcing Midoriya to fight stripped down to nothing, was designed to trigger this, whether DABI had known, guessed, or simply taken the chance. TSK. He was supposed to be standing at the top. and everyone else from his age, Midoriya, Todoroki, anyone who thought they could keep up, should be beneath him. And yet Midoriya and Todoroki had been a pain in the neck for him from day one of his hero course. The feeling it left behind was complicated, which he hadn't felt until now. Bakugo considered it for a moment, then dismissed it. Whatever it is, new power, old power, or borrowed power, he is gonna destroy it. Bakugo picked up his bag and slung it over his shoulder as he also started walking toward the exit. "Oi, Bakugo!" Dabi's voice carried across the field just as he reached the edge of the door, stopping him without turning. "Good work today." A brief pause. "Be back tomorrow after class at the same time. We've got more to do, and I am not letting you fall behind." Bakugo stood there for a moment, jaw tight, scarred hands gripping the strap of his bag, then continued walking without a word. Aizawa also spoke. "You too, Shinso." Recovery Girl looked at Midoriya with a defeated expression. "You again," she said. "Hi, Recovery Girl. Sorry to." "Don't apologize. Just lay down." She was already moving, pulling out supplies. She checked him over. Bruises on his arms, scrapes on his knees and elbows, and a few cuts that were bleeding sluggishly. After a few minutes, "You're physically spent, Midoriya," she said, stepping back. "Drink your fluids, sleep, and for the love of my sanity, try to make it a full week before you grace me with your presence again." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." She retreated to her office, muttering a dark litany about first-year students, insurance premiums, and the sweet, distant allure of early retirement. 3 more people joined the infirmary, not counting Midoriya, who was sitting up in bed drinking a juice box he was handed over. All Might stood near the window, still in his skinny form. Dabi leaned against the far wall with his arms crossed. Between them all, Principal Nizu sat in the visitor's chair. He looked remarkably composed, a cup of tea balanced on one knee, appearing entirely too comfortable in a room vibrating with unspoken secrets. "Young Midoriya." All Might's voice was careful, the voice he used when he was trying to be a teacher instead of a symbol and wasn't entirely sure he was doing it right. "What happened out there? When the energy broke free, did you see them again? The vestiges?" Midoriya lowered the juice box, the straw making a faint click against his teeth. He glanced tentatively at Nizu, then shifted his eyes toward Dabi. "It's fine, Midoriya." Dabi hadn't moved from the wall. Principal Nizu is one of the few people who knows about All Might's secret. The way he said few made it clear he had opinions about the number of people who qualified for that list and how rapidly it kept growing. "Yes, he said, his voice gaining a sudden, feverish clarity. "I did see something, but it was only one person, unlike in the hospital." He set the juice box on the bedside table. His hands were steady, but his eyes were wide with the weight of what he had learned. "He told me the power I used. It is called Black Whip, a quirk that belonged to him once, but now it has been ripening inside one for generations, getting stronger, faster, more volatile." Midoriya's gaze sharpened, his mind already spinning into a familiar spiral of analysis. He also mentioned that one for all responds to emotions. He tried to explain everything he remembered, then he paused. "And there are still 6 more. The room got quiet. Quirks waiting to manifest," Midoriya said. All Might's face changed. The worry that had been sitting behind his eyes since the training ground came forward and settled across his features, open and undisguised. He looked at Midoriya, a 16-year-old boy. "Fascinating." Nizu took a sip of his tea. "The implications are significant. If one for all has been accumulating quirks from each successive user, then the power student Midoriya carries is fundamentally different from what any previous holder experienced." He set the cup down on his knee. "However, I would caution against drawing too many conclusions from a single vestige encounter. There's still a great deal we don't understand about how One for All functions at this level. He looked at each of them in turn. For now, I recommend keeping this information within this room. We still have no leads on the traitor operating within UA, which means any intelligence about One for All's true nature could find its way to the wrong people. His voice didn't change when he said traitor, and even as he continued, it maintained the same pleasantness. The traitor could be anyone. Until we identify them, discretion is paramount. All Might hadn't moved. He was staring at the floor, his gaunt face drawn and skinny hands trembling slightly. "What have I done?" he said, almost inaudible. "I gave a child a burden I didn't fully understand. If I had known, and realized it soon, All Might." DABI's voice cut across the room. "Stop." All Might looked at DABI. "He is sitting right there." DABI nodded toward Midoriya. "He can hear you, and right now you're the guy who chose him. The person he looks up to more than anyone else on the planet. So if you're going to stand there second-guessing that choice out loud, in front of him, while he is already dealing with the fact that he just found out he's got 6 more unknown powers rattling around inside him." DABI paused. "Then you're not helping the situation." All Might's mouth opened and closed. It was a jarring sight. To the public, the symbol of peace was a mountain, unshakable, steady. A man whose smile could hold back the tide. But here, in the sterile light of the infirmary, he was just a man terrified that his greatest gift might become his successor's greatest curse. "You're right." All Might straightened and took a breath. When he looked at Midoriya again, the doubt was still there, but he had pushed it behind his eyes. "Forgive me, young Midoriya. My concern for your well-being should never be mistaken for a lack of faith in your spirit. I chose you for a reason, and that reason hasn't changed, even if the power has." "It's okay, All Might." Midoriya's voice was quiet. "I get it." All Might nodded, his voice regaining its resonance. "Now I want you to know that I believe in you, Midoriya. If anyone can carry this torch without being consumed by it, it's you." Midoriya searched his teacher's face for a long second, finding the familiar light there, and nodded. DABI pushed off the wall. "All right, Midoriya. Don't stare at the number. 6 sounds like a lot, and it is, but thinking about all 6 at once is just going to paralyze you. One step at a time, focus on what's in front of you right now, which is mastering what you just unlocked." "Black Whip," Midoriya murmured. "Yeah." DABI put his hands in his pockets. It originally belonged to the 5th user of One for All, a pro-hero named Daigoro Banjo. Hero name: Lariat. Midoriya's eyes widened, the fanboy instincts momentarily overriding his exhaustion. "You know about the previous users? I thought most of that history was lost." "Well, most of them were. However, there is some information about the recent users, and Banjo was the first holder to actually operate as a public hero. Before him, One for All mostly lay underground. He was apparently a loud, flashy guy and had a reputation for being impossible to ignore in a fight, which tracks, given what Black Whip looks like when it's going full blast." All Might nodded slowly. "I have additional information on several of the holders, their backgrounds, their fighting styles, and what little I have managed to scrape together about their personalities." DABI turned his focus back to Midoriya. "The reason we are sharing it with you isn't for trivia. The more you know about who these people were, how they fought, how they thought, and what they loved, the better you will be able to harmonize with what they left behind. When you meet them in the vestige space, you won't be going in blind." He paused. "All Might's going to fill you in on the rest of what we know. Next time you end up in that space, and there will be a next time, you will be ready." He scratched the side of his jaw. "I don't think putting you under Shinso's quirk again will get you back in there. The conditions were specific today. From what you have mentioned just now, it only worked because of the combination of factors. The exhaustion, emotional state, and desperation in the fight. We probably can't recreate that artificially again." So the next time it happens, it will be on one for all's terms, not ours. Midoriya was quiet, processing, and then he nodded, slowly at first, then with more conviction. I understand, Sensei. All right, head home now. It's already late and your mom's going to worry. Even if I manage to smooth things over for now by having Aizawa call and cover for your special training. Midoriya got out of bed. Then he bowed to Dabi, All Might, and Nizu, grabbed his yellow backpack and headed for the door. But he stopped in the doorway. Sensei. Dabi looked at him. Thank you for today. He bowed again, deeper this time, his voice thick with a promise. I won't waste this chance. I know you won't, Dabi said, the corner of his mouth twitching into something that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't a scowl either. Now get out of here before Recovery Girl comes back and blames me for you still being held up by us. Midoriya left, his footsteps fading down the hallway, uneven but determined. After Midoriya and Nizu left, Dabi and All Might remained behind in silence. Dabi sighed. All right, I will explain. What he meant wasn't Midoriya or One for All but All Might's master investigation. Even without saying it outright, All Might's hesitation was obvious, and Dabi had sensed it long before this moment, yet he chose to move forward anyway. He paused, glancing up at the ceiling, then back at All Might. I have got a bad feeling. About what, specifically? All Might. Dabi's voice was even. Do you honestly believe that a man like All for One, a man who has spent centuries hoarding power, eliminating threats, and dismantling everyone who's ever stood against him, would leave your master's family alone? Just because they don't have One for All anymore? Just because they're civilians now? All Might's expression shifted. The color that was left in his gaunt face drained out of it. No, he wouldn't, Dabi continued. He would have pursued every lead, used every method available to track them down. Then you think I don't know what I think yet. That's why I am looking into it. Dabi held up a hand. And before you spiral, there is a good chance he never found them. Your master covered her tracks well, and she wouldn't have left her family exposed. So this is me being cautious. That wasn't all. Dabi knew more than he was saying, and the lie sat in his mouth like something sour. But he needed All Might looking in this direction, asking the right questions, and searching in the right places so that when certain truths surfaced later, the groundwork would already be in place. He pushed forward before All Might could examine the statement too closely. All Might was very still. His blue eyes were locked on Dabi's face, reading him. Toshinori Yagi hadn't survived decades as the world's greatest hero without learning to tell when someone was holding something back. But he trusted Dabi, had since the USJ, when he stepped between his students and death without hesitation. And that trust, earned in that moment, was why All Might nodded now instead of pressing further. All right, I will help with the investigation, All Might said, his voice steady but quieter than usual. And now that I understand your reasoning, I realize I probably should have done this years ago. Yeah, you should have. Dabi said it without judgment. All Might accepted it without argument. He adjusted his oversized suit, straightened his thin shoulders, and headed for the door. Dabi. Thank you for what you did for young Midoriya today and for looking out for things I should have been watching myself. Don't thank me. Just follow up on it. All Might nodded and left. Dabi stood alone in Recovery Girl's office. He had done what he needed to do. Midoriya had Black Whip, the Vestige connection was active, and All Might was pointed toward Shimura's family, which meant he would eventually find what Dabi already knew was there. Dabi checked his phone. A message from Rumi. A photo of Eri and Toga sitting on the living room floor of their temporary quarters, drawing with crayons. Eri was showing Toga how to hold the crayon properly. Toga was watching with the focused intensity of a child learning something important. Dabi looked at the photo for a long time and headed home. While Dabi headed to the UA staff quarters, Two conversations were happening in two very different places. The first was on a street in Mizudafu. It was the same street where, more than a year ago, the symbol of peace had told a quirkless boy that he, too, could become a hero. It was almost late evening. Midoriya was trudging home from the train station, his yellow bag slung over one shoulder, his head a chaotic storm of noise. Black whip, the vestiges, 6 more quirks. His mouth was moving, muttering, processing, and running through everything that had happened today at a speed that made his lips twitch and his eyes unfocus. He walked right past a figure leaning against the wall without even seeing them. "Watch where you're going, Deku." Midoriya jumped, feet leaving the ground, bag swinging, the whole thing. "Hey, Kaken?" Bakugo looked like he had been waiting. "What are you? How long have you been standing there?" "I hate that look," Bakugo said, pushing himself off the wall. "That muttering, lost in your own head face. You seriously look like a crazy person. It's annoying." Midoriya just stared, the air suddenly feeling thin. Bakugo didn't waste time with pleasantries. "So, what was that?" he demanded, stepping closer. "Back there on the training ground, that green stuff that came out of your hands, is that a second quirk?" It's complicated," Midoriya stammered. "Listen, Deku. Here's the thing that's been bugging me." Bakugo took another step, his red eyes locked onto Midoriya's face. "You were quirkless your whole life. I know that better than anyone. Then suddenly you show up with an awesome quirk, and now there's another ability on top of that? That's a lot of crap to swallow for someone who couldn't even do a pull-up back in middle school." Midoriya's brain kicked into emergency processing mode. His mouth started moving before his better judgment could get a hand on the wheel. No, it's not a second quirk. Well, I mean, it looks like one, obviously, but it's actually more of an extension of my existing quirk. Like, the core power has these latent functionalities that are built into the framework of the original ability, and I'm just now starting to understand the mechanism behind how they manifest under high stress. "Stop." Midoriya's jaw snapped shut. "You're doing that thing where you use 100 words to say absolutely nothing," Bakugo said flatly. "And you've always been a garbage liar, Deku." Midoriya's left eye twitched. Bakugo looked at him for a long second, then his voice changed, a bit more direct. "Who gave it to you?" Midoriya blinked, the breath catching in his throat. "What? The power, Deku. Don't play stupid." Bakugo's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing into slits. "After the battle trial, you babbled some nonsense about getting your quirk from someone else. I haven't forgotten." He took a step forward, invading Midoriya's space. "So, who was it? Who handed you that power?" The question landed on Midoriya like a physical weight. His mouth opened and nothing came out. This wasn't Bakugo prying for leverage or looking for a way to ruin him. It was the only thing that mattered to him. He needed to know not the mechanics or the science, but the legacy behind it. It was the presence he was up against, because when he beat Midoriya, and in his mind that outcome was inevitable. He wanted to understand whose shadow he was stepping out of. Was it All Might? Or was it DABI? Midoriya's expression flickered through a frantic cycle of panic and calculation. He tried to construct a cover story, starting one in his head only to abandon it when he saw Bakugo's eyes already stripping away the lie. He opened his mouth, then closed it, the internal spiral visible in the way his shoulders hunched. The thing is, it's complicated," Midoriya stammered, his eyes darting to the floor. "There are reasons, Kaken. I can't exactly. Whatever. I don't care about your pathetic excuses." Bakugo cut him off, turning away with a sharp, violent motion. "Forget it. I am done here." He started walking away, leaving Midoriya behind without a backward glance. Midoriya stood frozen in his place, guilt-ridden. His head was down, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "All Might." Bakugo stopped mid-stride and spun around. Midoriya was looking at him, but the nervous, fidgeting, over-explaining version of the boy was gone. In his place stood someone Midoriya had only recently begun to discover. His gaze was steady, stripped of the usual twitch and the constant apology that usually defined him. "It's all might," Midoriya said. "He gave me his quirk." The confession sat in the air between them. Bakugo looked at him, the boy he had known since they were 4. A quirkless kid who used to follow him around, who cried when the other kids pushed him into the dirt, and who stood back up every single time with that stupid, unbreakable look on his face. And that kid, that worthless kid, had received the power of the greatest hero who ever lived. Something moved behind Bakugo's eyes. "Now that's more like it," he said. He grinned, all teeth and challenge, a refusal to stand second to anyone for any reason. "I always said I would surpass All Might," Bakugo said, his voice dropping into a low, gravelly promise. "But the old man is already fading, and beating a legend on his way out is one thing. But," he shrugged, turning his back and starting toward the light, "this works better. I will just have to break the person he thought was better than me." His footsteps faded down the sidewalk. Midoriya stood there alone. The realization of what he had just done, revealing the world's most dangerous secret without a word to his mentor, hit him. Fortunately, Chan doesn't seem to think of revealing it to anyone. Of course he won't, because that was Kaken. Midoriya let out a short, shaky laugh, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand before hoisting his bag. He turned and headed home. Meanwhile, in a place very close and impossibly far away, another conversation was happening. Inside Midoriya and One for All, the vestige space had changed since the last time Midoriya had been pulled into it. The formless dark was still there, vast, limitless, without walls or floor or sky, but now it had furniture. 8 chairs were now arranged in a loose semicircle, each occupied by a figure. From the first user to the 7th, this was new. For most of One for All's history, the vestiges had been exactly what the name implied, traces. They were echoes, fragments of memory preserved in the quirk like photographs pressed between the pages of a book. They couldn't speak, couldn't interact. They were merely residual data, the psychic impressions of the dead. But in the last few months, things have changed. Coinciding with Midoriya's accelerating development, and with Black Whip's manifestation, the connections were forming faster than anyone had predicted. The vestiges had solidified, taken shape, and gained enough substance to hold conversations. Of course, they still couldn't talk to Midoriya at will. That seemed to require specific conditions. Emotional extremes, altered states of consciousness, and moments where the barrier between the wielder and the power thinned. But among themselves, in the space between Midoriya's awareness, they could now communicate. Daigoro Banjo, the 5th, was the first to speak. "All right, let's talk about the new kid." He slammed his palms together. "You all see that? Tell me you saw that. Black Whip. First try. It moved just like mine, except, and I can't stress this enough, it's way more funky than mine ever was. The raw output is off the charts." He jabbed a finger at the semicircle. "He is naive." The voice came from 2 chairs down. Kudo, the 2nd user. His expression was a cold blend of disapproval and studied indifference. "He is too soft, the type who tries to save everyone, pushes his own body to the brink for civilians, and nearly tore himself apart because he couldn't accept even a single loss. And in a real war, that kind of thinking doesn't win battles, it just delays the inevitable and turns into a liability." Bruce, the 3rd user, beside him, nodded. He spoke less than Kudo, but his words carried the same weight. "The one with the flame quirk they call DABI. He has a compelling ruthlessness this power demands, and he would have been the stronger vessel." The flame kid turned it down. Banjo replied, rolling his eyes. "And do we really need to go through this again? because I am pretty sure we have already had this conversation. We will keep having it, Kudo said evenly, until I am satisfied with the outcome. The authority in Kudo's voice was forged in an era where hesitation was a death sentence and idealism was a luxury for the dead. Did you already forget? He also has a quirk, said a quieter voice from further down the semicircle. Hikage Shinomori, the fourth user. He sat apart from the others as he had done for most things throughout his life. A man who looked at the world, judged it broken, and spent 18 years in seclusion strengthening a power he never once used against the enemy it was meant to face. He avoided combat for a simple reason. He knew with brutal honesty that even with his quirk, danger sense, he stood no chance against All for One. So he focused on a single goal, making that power stronger for whoever came after him. He died in his 40s, written off as old age. At least that was the belief until recently. We've discussed what happens when one for all inhabits a body that already contains a quirk, Shinomori said, the voice of someone who had lived with the consequences of that question and died from them. The power grows inside the wielder, accumulates and multiplies, and eventually, it begins to consume the vessel. It was only recently, after connecting a few dots, that the truth began to surface. While also obsessing, Yagi dug deeper, tracking down the medical and autopsy reports tied to Hikage Shinomori, and that was when everything finally came to light. The semicircle went quiet. Bruce and Kudo exchanged glances but didn't argue the point because they couldn't. The evidence was sitting in front of them. Shinomori himself, dead at 40, killed not by All for One or any villain but by the power he had been entrusted with. So by some twist of fate. Banjo said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet, the most powerful quirk in human history can only be wielded to its full potential by someone born without any power at all. The one who has nothing is the one who can carry everything. The first user's voice came from the far end of the semicircle. Yoichi Shigaraki hadn't spoken until now. His form was the most defined of all of them. The original, source, and brother who had been given a power he didn't want by a brother who wanted to control everything. That's the paradox one for all has always carried. The strength of the powerless. It counts for something, Kudo said. It doesn't count for everything.
No,
Yoichi agreed. It doesn't, and he will have to earn the rest. The semicircle sat with that. 8 figures and 8 chairs in the dark space inside a power that had been growing for generations, discussing the boy who would inherit all of it or break under its weight. Banjo broke the silence first because Banjo always broke silences. So we have an agreement, he said, looking between them. We watch, wait, and let him prove himself. His gaze settled on Kudo and Bruce. And when he does, because he will, I am saying that now, you 2 stubborn old soldiers are going to shake his hand, pass on your quirks, and admit you were wrong about him. We will see, Kudo said. That's not a no. Banjo grinned. I will take that. The meeting adjourned. Same time next manifestation. Everybody. Nobody laughed, but none argued either. The vestige space settled into stillness, the chairs remaining as they were, the 9th seat empty and waiting, patient, for the boy who would one day sit in it and understand what it meant to carry the weight of 8 lifetimes on his shoulders. For now, that boy walked home, his eyes still red from tears, smiling like an idiot because his childhood rival had just grinned at him and, for the first time, called him a worthy opponent. He had no idea what was waiting inside his own body, though he would find out soon enough. All Might stood beside DABI near the north edge of the training field. To any student glancing over, he was the same pillar of hope they saw every morning. Back straight, chest out, and that iconic, unwavering smile firmly in place. But Midoriya was not just any student. Izuku had spent a lifetime dissecting the anatomy of that smile. He knew the precise depth of the crinkle around the eyes and the exact duration a grin held. From across the field, Midoriya felt a chill. This wasn't the plus ultra grin he was used to seeing. It was the look of someone standing helplessly, watching a world he could no longer touch. What could be that pushed him to such an extent? He wondered. All Might's gaze moved across the entire class, scanning the field the way he always did, but slower this time, more deliberate, as if he were taking stock of something that mattered. Midoriya quickly looked away, burying his face in his notebook before his staring became a distraction. 20 meters away, DABI leaned against a railing, having not said anything for a long moment. All Might had been quiet since the morning briefing, which usually wouldn't have mattered. DABI was used to silence, but now it was starting to affect even him. "You don't need to watch the whole session," DABI said finally. "I want to," All Might replied. His voice was deep and resonant in his muscle form, but the boom of it lacked its usual brassy cheer. These young heroes, they had shown such improvement and tenacity in such a short time. Beyond that, they aren't satisfied with where they stand. Such maturity is rare amongst the first years. He turned his head slightly toward DABI. "I understand now why you hold them in such high regard, DABI. It is a source of great shame for me that I have contributed so little, despite us beginning this journey as educators at the same time." All Might looked back at the field, his smile tightening with a bittersweet edge. "The least I can do is bear witness to their growth and efforts." Below them, on the eastern platform, a student executed a flawless evasion sequence, triggering a ripple of competitive excitement through the rest of the class. The atmosphere was electric, fueled by the kind of raw ambition that usually defined the upperclassmen. Class 1A had been like this all week. Still, what's the reason behind All Might's complicated expression? Midoriya revealing the truth about his quirk to Bakugo wasn't what had put that uncertainty on All Might's face. Toshinori understood better than most that some truths eventually outgrow their cages, a lesson he had learned firsthand. So what else could make the symbol of peace look so heavy? "I assume you read it," DABI said. It wasn't a question but a prompt, delivered with the flat tone of a man who already knew the answer. All Might remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the training ground met the sky. "I did." The investigation report had been short. DABI had written it himself, drawing from 3 separate channels. Nizu's sources, connections All Might had built over his career that still answered when the right name was invoked, and a few threads that DABI had pulled himself through networks he felt no obligation to explain. The picture it assembled was not a comfortable one. It told the story of Nana Shimura's son, a boy raised in foster care, growing up in the empty space left by a mother who had vanished without explanation. Unbeknownst to him, he took that sacrifice as abandonment and turned it into walls. Rigid, punishing structures that resembled discipline from the outside but felt like something far harsher within the home, enclosing his wife, his daughter, and the boy, Tenko. DABI hadn't written the name in the report. He had left it as youngest child, male, approximate age consistent with, letting the rest sit in implication. "The house?" All Might asked. DABI did not answer because it was already mentioned in the report. The Shimura residence had been reduced to splinters and ash. In the municipal records, it was listed as an unattributed villain attack. And since the property records showed it had been sold 6 months prior, the paper leads effectively ended there unless someone was willing to dig deeper. It was him, wasn't it? The certainty in All Might's voice was absolute, cutting through any possibility of doubt. All for one. DABI neither confirmed nor denied it, even though he knew the truth for a different reason, one that underpinned everything else he understood about the situation and still couldn't be spoken aloud. What he said instead was, "The timing is consistent with that theory. He killed her husband, forced her to give up her child, and then, when she was finally in the ground," All Might's jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck cording with a sudden, violent tension. "He went after them anyway." DABI said nothing. Sometimes the only respectful thing to do was to not say anything. All Might went on, his voice flattening into a dangerous monotone. My master had given up everything. Her name, son, and own heart, all in the belief that distance would keep him safe from the target on her back. And it didn't. None of them were ever safe. We don't know the full picture yet, DABI said, his voice carefully neutral. It was a half-truth, a way to anchor All Might before the man drifted too far into the dark. All Might looked at him. The hero's eyes, in the costume, had a particular raw directness. It was not the calculated projection of the public symbol, but the actual man underneath it, sharp and tired and very, very old in the way that people who had carried something too heavy for too long got old. Below them, the students continued their session. Hiroshima took a direct hit from the obstacle course, his skin hardening into jagged rock. He wiped a smudge of dirt from his face, grinned, and dived back into the fray with the cheerfulness of someone who viewed every blow as a lesson. Bakugo, at the far end of the field, had stopped arguing with Aizawa's correction and was listening. Midoriya, watching from the waiting group, had noticed it too. His notebook was pressed to his chest, his eyes darting with that familiar, frantic intelligence as he scribbled a fresh observation. All Might watched the tableau for a long moment, the tension in his shoulders slowly yielding to a solemn pride. They are going to be extraordinary, he said. He didn't name names. Yeah, DABI replied, his gaze following Bakugo's explosive movements. I will make sure of it. The wind moved across the training field. Near the eastern platform, a student finally landed a complex evasion drill they had been attempting for an hour. A raw, wordless exhale of triumph tore from their throat in success. All Might's expression flickered, a complicated mix of hope and heartbreak, but he didn't turn away. I will read the rest of the report tonight, he said. Take your time. It's not going anywhere. Nana and her family deserved better. All Might whispered, his voice almost lost to the wind. And more than anything, I wasn't. You weren't there yet, DABI interrupted. His voice was flat, cutting off the self-flagellation before it could take root. That's not the same as failing them. All Might said nothing. DABI let the silence sit, and he was good at that. Below them, Class 1 trained on burning, pushing, and testing their own limits. They moved with the stubborn brightness of a generation that had already decided the future was something worth bleeding for. It had been that way for the better part of a week now, ever since the preparations for the final exams had kicked into a motion that consumed every free hour the first years had. Written portions in the mornings with their textbooks cracked open, practical drills in the afternoons until their uniforms were soaked through. The routine had an almost comfortable weight to it, and nobody complained, including Kaminari, usually the first to find a reason to deflect. Because somewhere between incidents they happened to be involved in and seeing their teacher risking his life and later their friends, something had shifted in Class 1A. They weren't just students anymore and were becoming a unit that cannot be ignored. Midoriya Izuku had been staring at his right hand for approximately 3 minutes. Why are you staring at it like it owes you money, Deku? Uraraka asked, not breaking the form of her stretches. Ah, it's nothing, Uraraka-san. Just thinking. He closed his hands, then opened them again. He snapped his fist shut, then unfurled it. There was no crackle of green electricity, no violent eruption of dark tendrils. Just his hand, mapped with the scars of bones he had broken, healed, and broken again. But something was different this time. Midoriya could actually feel it. Black Whip, according to the plot of events DABI remembered, which now felt more and more bits and pieces like Midoriya unblocked the Black Whip in a quite disastrous situation, putting himself and other students in danger, which made him wish to not have that power, sealing it away. That took days to break through again. Here it hadn't been sealed. It remained, present and waiting, like something that had always belonged to him and was only now revealing itself properly. The problem was that Midoriya had no idea what it looked like from the outside when he used it. and judging by the initial manifestation under Shinso's brainwashing, it was anything but subtle. Initially, Midoriya was hesitant to use the new power in front of his classmates, unsure how they would react. Awakening something like this wasn't normal. It happened often. It is almost unheard of. It defied the fundamental laws of quark science they had been taught since kindergarten. At the same time, he knew he couldn't keep it hidden, especially with practical exams approaching and no way to predict what UAS faculty was designing the tests for. If Black Whip manifested in the middle of a high-stakes exam, it would only create more problems. Better to show it now in a controlled setting around people he trusted. So during the scheduled practice session, the very next day after he first used Black Whip, he made the decision to demonstrate it. All right, 2-on-1 evasion drill. Ida announced, his leg engines already humming. Midoriya-kun will be the primary target. Shiro-kun and I will act as the pursuit team. The objective is to avoid capture within the 3-minute limit. Are all parties ready? Midoriya took a breath, feeling the sense within one for all thrumming in response to his heartbeat. He looked at his friends, his jaw setting with a new kind of resolve. Ready! Midoriya took his position in the center of the training field. Shiro grinned, his elbows clicking as he unspooled long strips of tape. No hard feelings, Midoriya. We're not holding back today. Begin. Ida shot forward immediately. His recipro burst roaring with a metallic scream as he closed the distance. From the opposite flank, Shiro's tape lashed out like a whip, weaving through the air to cut off the lateral escape routes. It was a perfect pincer movement which could potentially end a match in seconds. Midoriya activated full cowling 8% and dodged Ida's initial rush, but he could feel the trap closing. Shiro's tape was already circling behind him, and Ida was pivoting on a dime, his exhaust ports glowing white-hot as he came back for the tackle. Now, Midoriya thought. He reached for that sensation DABI-sensei had helped him access, the specific, jagged frequency he had felt during the training accident. The familiar surge raced through his body, sharp and electric, but something else came with it this time. Black Whip. Jet black tendrils snapped out from his forearms. The first line anchored itself to a reinforced concrete pillar behind him, instantly yanking him backward out of the path of Shiro's tape. Simultaneously, a second tendril lashed out to wrap around a nearby railing and pivot Midoriya's entire trajectory in midair. He swung through the gap between his two classmates as a dark blur. He landed 10 meters away, the black energy retracting smoothly into his skin like it had never been there at all. He stood tall, his breathing even, the power perfectly contained. Even though no one was down, the drill collapsed into stunned silence. Ida froze mid-step, his engines sputtering out with a pathetic hiss as he stared at the spot where Midoriya had been. Shiro stood motionless, his tape dangling from his elbows like limp streamers, his jaw literally hanging open. On the sidelines, the chatter of the rest of Class 1A died instantly. The silence was heavy, thick with the collective realization that they had just seen the impossible. Hiroshima was the first to find his voice, though it sounded faint, even to him. Midoriya, man. Was that a second quirk? DKU. Uraraka was the second to break the perimeter, rushing forward with her eyes wide enough to swallow her face. What was that? Since when can you do that? Midoriya laughed nervously, rubbing the back of his neck as the entire class began to converge around him. I have been working on it with DABI-sensei after regular hours, he admitted, his cheeks flushing. It's a new technique I finally figured out how to stabilize. I wanted to show you all before the practicals, as I didn't want it to come out in the middle of a test and throw everyone off. Man, Midoriya. Hiroshima cheered, slamming his hardened fists together with a sharp clack. Secret training to evolve your style? That's the height of dedication. It wasn't really a secret, Midoriya protested weakly. More like extra practice? I had to make sure I wasn't a danger to everyone else before I brought it onto the field. True, Tokoyami rumbled, dark shadow manifesting from his shoulder to nod in grim approval. Uncontrolled power is a double-edged sword that cuts both friend and foe. Azui tilted her head, fingers on chin. Ribbit. So this is like an advanced technique? Similar to how Todoroki-chan learned to use both sides of his quirk together. Exactly like that. Midoriya jumped on the comparison, immensely relieved to have a benchmark that didn't involve explaining vestiges or stockpiled quirks. From the observation deck, a familiar, raspy voice cut through the excitement, sharp enough to draw blood. TCH, about time you stopped acting like a damn amateur. The class went quiet as Bakugo leaned over the railing, his arms crossed over his chest and his expression a mask of bored indifference. Akin, Midoriya blinked, looking up. Yesterday you were flailing around like an idiot. Bakugo continued bluntly. Today you actually looked like you had a brain in your skull. It's about time. Wait, you knew about this? Kaminari shouted, pointing between the two. How come you didn't say anything to the rest of us? Why would I? Bakugo's tone made it clear he found the question offensive. It's not my business what training Deku does on his own time. As long as he isn't half-assing the work, I don't care. It was pure, undiluted Bakugo speak for, I noticed and approved but would rather die than say so directly. Midoriya, Todoroki stepped forward. You've been hiding this? You must have been holding back during the sports festival. No, Isuya. Midoriya waved his hands frantically. I only discovered I could do this a few days ago. It was a total accident at first. Oh, my apologies for the assumption. Todoroki nodded, his face returning to its usual stoic mask. How can one be so smart and a complete moron at the exact same time? Bakugo thought, his eye twitching as he watched the exchange. Todoroki didn't let up, his curiosity piqued. How long have you been developing this technique? Just a few days, Midoriya admitted. Dabi-sensei helped me figure out the safety threshold. It's still really new, so I'm still mapping the limitations. What's the maximum effective range? Yaoyorozu chimed in. And the tensile strength? Can the tendrils support your full body weight during high-velocity aerial maneuvers? Or is it strictly for short-range redirection? Oh, the range seems to be about 15 to 20 meters right now, Midoriya said, his hands moving instinctively as if measuring the air. Maybe more with practice. The strength is, well, it's comparable to my regular enhancement when I focus on a single line, but the tension diffuses if I try to sprout multiple tendrils at once. And yes, it can support my weight. Dabi-sensei has been spotting me during building-to-building mobility drills. That's a significant tactical advantage, Yaoyorozu observed, her eyes bright. Enhanced mobility, capture capability, environmental manipulation. You have essentially added a mid-range utility layer to a close-quarters power set. It's also flashy as hell, Jiro added. Those black energy whips are hard to miss, which means opponents will see it coming, Tokoyami noted. To maximize its effectiveness, you must develop feints and misdirection to maximize effectiveness. Midoriya's hero analysis notebook was out in a flash. His pen blurred across the page. That's a great point, Tokoyami-kun. If I use smaller, low-output tendrils as feints to draw their eyes, I could execute a high-tension maneuver from a blind spot. Nerd alert! Kaminari shouted, cupping his hands around his mouth. Midoriya has entered the analysis mode. Let him cook, Kirishima laughed, throwing an arm around Kaminari's shoulder. That brain of his is what makes him so manly. From the observation deck, Bakugo watched the class swarm Midoriya. The nerd is finally growing some teeth, he thought. Even though he refused to assist Midoriya until he controlled it, he had been present during one of the late-night training sessions, watching Dabi put Midoriya through the ringer. It was the kind of growth that made Bakugo's competitive instincts flare, making him want to train harder and ensure that no matter how fast Deku ran, the shadow in front of him remained Bakugo's. But it also made him not proud exactly. That would be going too far, but something adjacent to it. The acknowledgement that Deku was taking this seriously, not wasting the opportunity, and becoming the kind of rival worth surpassing. Oi! Bakugo's voice barked across the gym, ending the chatter. You nerds done gawking? We've got practical exams coming up. Get back to training. Since when did you become the class cheerleader, Bakugo? Zero teased, though he was already moving back into position. Since you idiots started wasting time. Aizawa's voice crackled over the intercom. For once, Bakugo has a point. Resume your drills. Midoriya, you're cleared to integrate the new technique, but if I see even a hint of it redlining, I am calling it a quit. Understood. Yes, sensei. Midoriya stopped, the pen-scratching excitement in his eyes flickering for a second. He looked at his hand, the vessel for all those quirks, and then back at her. He offered a small, reassuring smile, genuinely touched. I will be careful, Uraraka-san. Promise. Dabi-sensei has been incredibly strict about the output levels. He says controlled growth is always better than explosive progress that ends in a hospital bed. Good. Uraraka's bright smile returned, though the concern lingered in her eyes. Because I need you in one piece for the practicals. We're going to crush whatever the teachers throw at us. Yeah. Midoriya's determination reignited. Let's do our best. As they moved to their assigned training positions, Midoriya allowed himself a moment of internal relief. Fortunately, his classmates accepted the new technique with little suspicion. The black tendrils flickered briefly at his fingertips, almost as if they were responding to the warmth of his gratitude, before settling back into the depths of one for all. Midoriya turned back to the field, ready to master this power one controlled step at a time. Another week bled into the calendar, and the progression was moving faster than DABI had anticipated. The students were responding well to the increased intensity. Their movements were sharper, and their decision-making was becoming instinctive rather than calculated. But he had noticed something troubling. He was spending too much time focusing on Midoriya's development, while the rest of the class received generic instruction. That needed to change. If he wanted to be a better teacher, he needed to work with everyone on an individual level. So he had begun tailoring specific training regimens to each student's quirk, fighting style, and potential growth trajectory. But before diving into individual sessions, there was something fundamental they all needed to understand. Everyone, gather up. DABI called out across the training field. Listen up. Before we move into the next phase, there is something I need to make absolutely clear. The class assembled, still breathing hard from their morning warm-up drills, with sweat-soaked uniforms, flushed faces, and alert eyes. Don't use unfinished moves or untested techniques in real combat, DABI said, his tone carrying a rare gravity. That applies to your practical exams and your careers alike. The moment you rely on something you haven't fully mastered, you're staking your life on it. Confusion rippled through the group. Several students exchanged glances, clearly not understanding the point. Kaminari raised his hand hesitantly. But DABI-sensei, isn't that what training is for? Learning new stuff so we can use it. Yeah, Ishido chimed in. And during the sports festival, everyone was breaking their limits and trying new things. How are we supposed to get better if we don't push the envelope in a real fight? Let me put it in perspective, DABI said, settling into a more instructive tone. Imagine two people forced into a life-or-death sword fight. The first has trained for exactly 1 week. They've learned the basic stances, a few cuts, maybe 1 or 2 fancy techniques. Nothing is mastered, but they have a foundation. He paused, making sure everyone was following. The second person has never held a sword. They have never had a single lesson and don't understand even the basics of form or technique. They are completely, blissfully untrained. Ida's hand shot up. Sensei, surely the person with training. They fight to the death. DABI continued, brushing past the interruption. No rules, referee, or time limit, just two people with swords in their hands. So tell me, who walks away alive? Now that he had their full attention, the class broke into debate almost immediately. Has to be the trained guy, Kirishima said confidently. Even 1 week of practice gives you an edge. It's about discipline. The untrained person could get lucky, Hagakure countered, her sleeves waving. Maybe they do something so weird and unexpected the other guy wouldn't know how to block it? Statistically, the trained individual should demonstrate superior performance, Yaoyorozu analyzed. Though variables such as raw athletic ability, reaction time, and psychological fortitude could certainly skew the results, the beginner might simply succumb to panic and freeze. Tokoyami added darkly. Fear can paralyze the inexperienced. Bakugo scoffed, leaning back with a look of pure disdain. Doesn't matter. The one who wants it more wins. All that training means jack shit if you hesitate. Wrong, partly wrong, totally wrong, and still wrong. DABI acknowledged. The person who trained for 1 week dies and is almost guaranteed. Silence fell across the training field. What? Multiple voices responded in shock. That makes no sense. Kaminari protested. Why would having more skill be a disadvantage? Because knowledge without mastery is a death trap. DABI explained, his voice taking on a serrated edge. The guy who trained for a week? His head is a mess of half-remembered instructions. Keep your guard up. Don't overextend. For footwork, move the lead foot first. Execute technique number 3. His brain is trying to process a manual while someone is trying to take his head off. DABI stepped into the center of the group, his body stiffening as he mimicked a basic sword stance. Their body hesitates, trying to remember the correct form they learned. They attempt to execute techniques they haven't internalized, and every movement requires conscious command from his brain. In a real fight, conscious thought takes time. It takes away the valuable fraction of a second where they are vulnerable. Then he shifted, moving with fluid, instinctive grace. Meanwhile, the person who never trained, they just swing the sword. They move however it feels natural, with no hesitation, second-guessing, or trying to remember if this is the right stance or that's the proper grip. They move on pure instinct and survival drive. Their body does whatever it takes to not die, and ironically, that single-minded desperation often works better than half-learned technique. The class was silent now, actually thinking about the implications. So, what you're saying is, Midoriya spoke up, notebook already out and scribbling furiously. That partial knowledge is a trap? It creates hesitation and a false sense of security that doesn't actually exist under pressure. DABI gave a small, approving nod. Half-learned techniques create a false sense of control. You start believing you have an edge you haven't actually earned. But if you can't execute it cleanly while someone is trying to kill you, you end up in a worse position than the person relying on pure animal instinct. But then how are we actually supposed to improve? Uraraka asked, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. If trying new moves in combat is dangerous, how do we ever move forward? Master it first, at least to a point where it's battle-ready. DABI said simply, drill it until it becomes instinct, until your body can execute it without conscious command, even under stress, even when you're injured or exhausted. That takes forever, Kaminari complained. Better to take time and survive than rush and die. DABI countered, his voice flat and uncompromising. This is the difference between training for a trophy and training for survival. In sports, you can afford to experiment and fail. In hero work, every mistake is a permanent one. He paused to let that settle before making his final point. The line between life and death is razor thin, DABI said. A split-second hesitation while you try to recall the right counter. A sloppy execution because you haven't drilled the muscle memory, and a flicker of doubt about whether you can pull it off. That's all the opening an enemy needs. The weight of his words settled over the class like a physical thing. So here is the rule, DABI continued. In training, experiment freely. Try every stupid idea you have, push the boundaries, and fail where it's safe. But when the stakes are real, whether in practical exams or field work, you rely only on what you've mastered. You use what your body knows well enough to do on instinct. Most of the students still looked uncertain, the depth of the lesson not yet fully integrated into their worldviews. That was fine. DABI knew they would understand it eventually. They would feel that cold realization when they found themselves in the middle of a real fight, realizing that the cool new move they hadn't quite perfected was the very thing that was about to get them killed. Hopefully, they would learn that lesson here, rather than somewhere there were no do-overs. All right, the lecture's over, DABI announced. DABI announced, the sudden change in his tone snapping them back to the present. Now we get to the actual work. I'm implementing individual development plans tailored to your specific quirks and fighting styles. Excited murmurs rippled through the class. The weighted training from the sports festival continues, but only as a warm-up, DABI added. Keep them on for the first hour. Then we drop the weights and shift into quirk-specific drills. With the practical exams coming up, efficiency matters more than volume. He pulled out a tablet, his thumb scrolling through a list of detailed dossiers. Kirishima, you're up first. DABI pushed him relentlessly. He stayed in Kirishima's ear, telling him he was weak, that he couldn't protect a fly at this level, and that his quirk was useless if it shattered under real pressure. What DABI wanted from him was simple, an unbreakable wall. He didn't mention it aloud, which would have ruined the villainous instructor persona, but he genuinely liked this kid's spirit. Kirishima embodied non-toxic masculinity, kind, supportive, and fiercely determined without being over-aggressive. He was the kind of hero the world actually needed more of. But to survive the world DABI knew was coming, Red Riot had to become Obsidian. Ida, on the other hand, received a suggestion that turned his face pale. DABI proposed the removal and regeneration of his engines, the same brutal method his brother, Tensei, had used to reach the top. I would need to confirm with my brother first, Ida said slowly, his voice tight, and obtain medical clearance, and ensure it wouldn't interfere with the practical exams. Tensei was obviously still active as a hero, as there was no stain incident to sideline him. I already spoke with Tensei, DABI revealed, watching Ida's eyes widen. He said, and I quote, "If Tenya is serious about surpassing me, he'll do it. If he's scared, he won't. Apparently, ripping out your mufflers is a family rite of passage." DABI didn't sugarcoat it. He explained that the procedure was agonizing and the recovery would be slow, but the potential for sheer, unadulterated speed was undeniable. Ida's jaw set with a hard, familiar determination. I am willing to undergo the procedure, but only after the practical exams. As the class representative, I cannot risk being sidelined when my classmates are depending on me. Tokoyami was the one who interested DABI the most. Dark Shadow possessed terrifying potential, but the rampage problem in total darkness was a critical, glaring weakness. I am aware of the limitations, Sensei. Tokoyami's voice was somber. I have been working on control, but progress is slow. That's because you're approaching it the wrong way, DABI said bluntly. You're trying to suppress Dark Shadow in the dark. You're holding it back, fighting your quirk's nature instead of working with it. You're treating your own power like an enemy. Dark Shadow's yellow eyes narrowed suspiciously as it emerged from Tokoyami's shadow. The session that followed was intense. DABI had taken Tokoyami to an isolated section of the training grounds, sealed off from external light. When dark shadow emerged in the absolute blackness, the transformation was instantaneous and dramatic. The creature swelled to a monstrous size, its strength and aggression spiking until the air in the room felt heavy. Honestly, DABI was impressed. If properly harnessed, this quirk could make Tokoyami as strong as Bakugo and Todoroki, at least in terms of raw combat potential. The problem was that, after that session, Dark Shadow refused to manifest anywhere near DABI. He might have beaten the spirit out of it a bit too enthusiastically. A fire quirk was the ultimate deterrent, and DABI hadn't even needed to break a sweat to keep the shadow in line. He also hinted something. "You know," DABI added, watching the bird-headed boy compose himself. "With enough control, you wouldn't just be grounded. You could probably achieve flight." Dark Shadow's eyes, currently peering out from the collar of Tokoyami's uniform, instantly brightened with interest despite their sulking. "Flight," Tokoyami repeated, clearly intrigued. "Something to work toward," DABI confirmed. "Master the darkness rampage first, then we explore advanced applications." Throughout the day, as DABI moved from student to student, he felt a persistent, prickling sensation at the back of his neck. Two pairs of eyes were boring into him with uncomfortable, predatory intensity. He tried to ignore it, burying himself in Yaoyorozu's tactical drills and Ajui's mobility exercises. But the weight of those stares was becoming uncomfortable. He couldn't take it anymore. Finally, DABI sighed, ran a hand through his hair, and turned around slowly. Bakugo and Todoroki stood there. Yeah, I know," DABI said, meeting their twin glares. "I will get to you too soon. Stop looking at me like that before you actually burn a hole through my skull. I'm not made of steel, you know?" For a moment, he truly took in their expressions. The unsettled eagerness radiating from both was almost a physical force. An unyielding need to improve, to surpass, to be the last one standing at the top of the ranks. Bakugo was explosive and aggressive, and Todoroki's had his usual cold face, but the intensity was identical. If he delayed their individual training any longer, he was reasonably sure they would both spontaneously combust. Actually, you know what? DABI reconsidered his schedule. "Everyone else, stay on your drills. You two problem children, follow me. We're starting now before you give me a migraine." Finally, Bakugo snapped, his palms letting out a series of small, impatient pops. "I've been waiting all damn week for you to stop wasting time with the extras." Todoroki didn't say anything, but the slight inclination of his head showed he was satisfied. As they walked toward a more isolated training area, DABI felt a mixture of anticipation and slight dread. These two are going to be a nightmare, he thought, the competitive kind that pushes each other to dangerous limits. But that was also what made them exceptional. The trick was going to be channeling that madness into something productive. He could work with that. Actually, despite the intensity, or perhaps because of it, he was looking forward to seeing exactly how far they could go. Teaching students who wanted to learn so badly, who were willing to bleed for an inch of progress, and who stared at you with a determination so fierce it was almost unsettling. That was what made the work worthwhile, even if their stares occasionally gave him chills. "All right," DABI said once they reached the isolated training ground. "Let's see what you two are really capable of when you stop holding back." Both of them smiled. It wasn't a reassuring sight. The area DABI had selected was remote by design. It was tucked far enough from the main campus that collateral damage wouldn't trigger alarms, reinforced to withstand high-tier quirk output, and wired with cameras that fed directly to Recovery Girl's office. With these two, medical intervention wasn't a possibility. It was almost a must. Bakugo and Todoroki stood 10 meters apart, ready to begin any time. "First things first," DABI said, positioning himself between them. "We establish ground rules. This is training, not a death match. So push each other hard, but not past the point of permanent injury." "Understood. TCH?" "Whatever." Bakugo's hands were already sparkling. Understood, Todoroki confirmed. Second rule. You follow my instructions, even in the middle of a fight. If I say stop, you stop, and if I tell you to switch tactics, you switch. Your egos don't get a vote in my curriculum. Bakugo's eyes twitched. Are we here to train? Or am I supposed to listen to you talk all day? Bakugo, I am dead serious. Get that through your thick skull now, or this won't end well for either of us. Dabi's voice had dropped into a low, dangerous register that landed exactly as intended. Then he pulled out a tablet with detailed analysis. I have been observing you two for months. Sports festival, drills, and actual combat situations. I know your patterns, strengths, and weaknesses. And when I give you instructions, they're based on data, not an opinion. He turned to Todoroki first. Your quirk is, frankly, absurd. Half cold, half hot gives you complete elemental control. You can shift between offense and defense on instinct, create mobility options on the fly, and lock down entire areas if you need to. Which means you're built to adapt to almost any situation you're thrown into, and when you actually use it to its full potential, it's as close to a cheat code as it gets. Todoroki's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. But, Dabi continued, you're still holding back on your left side. You've accepted it intellectually, decided it's your power and not his, but you haven't internalized it. In high-pressure situations, you still default to ice because it's your comfort zone. It's the wall you've lived behind your whole life. I use fire when necessary, Todoroki said defensively. No, Dabi corrected sharply. You use fire when your ice isn't enough. That's reactive. It's a backup plan, not a strategy. You're waiting for the fight to dictate your moves instead of dictating the fight yourself. He shifted his stance slightly. Watch! He raised his left hand this time, and flames erupted, brilliant orange-red, the color of Todoroki's fire. But Dabi didn't stop there. As the flames intensified, he began to compress the energy, the core of the fire shifting through the spectrum. Orange to yellow, yellow to a blinding, incandescent white, and finally a roar of pure sapphire blue. The temperature in the surrounding area spiked noticeably. Both students stared, genuinely surprised, especially Todoroki, whose eyes widened slightly, because he remembered, somewhere deep and half-buried, that his eldest brother Toya's flames had started that same shade, the same orange-red as their father's and as his own left side. And now, many years later, he stood casually, cycling through the entire thermal spectrum as if he were changing channels. Dabi caught the look on Todoroki's face and allowed himself a small, smug smile. He held the display a beat longer than was strictly necessary. He was absolutely, unquestionably showing off, and he had zero intention of stopping. He had discovered recently that this was one of his favorite parts of teaching, not that he would ever admit it out loud. What Dabi didn't explain was the physics behind it and what made the technique genuinely difficult. The color of a flame is a direct signature of its temperature and combustion efficiency. Red and orange flames are the coolest, burning at roughly 600 to 1000 degrees Celsius. They are the result of incomplete combustion, where unburnt carbon particles glow but aren't fully consumed. As temperature rises, flames shift through yellow and white. Blue flames are the hottest visible color, reaching 1400 degrees Celsius and above, produced by complete combustion, where fuel burns efficiently with sufficient oxygen and releases maximum energy. Dabi's quirk, Blue Flame, generated intense heat reaching approximately 2000 degrees Celsius or higher. His flames had originally burned red, gradually shifting to blue over years of intense emotional distress and conditioning. Ordinarily, the heat he produced was tied directly to his emotional state. The greater his rage, the hotter and more volatile his output. And now, replicating Todoroki's orange flame required him to work in reverse. He studied the exact thermal signature of the Todoroki family's quirk, the specific combustion pattern, and the way it interacted with surrounding oxygen, and then intentionally suppressed his own temperature output while manually adjusting the light spectrum. It required a level of microscopic control that Endeavor himself would have envied. "Your fire," DABI said, letting the flames roll between his fingers as he spoke. "It has more potential than you can even fathom. Right now, you treat it like a blunt instrument. Point, release, overwhelm. But fire isn't that simple. It's about control over temperature, shaping the flame itself, and the manipulation of heat as an environment." He closed his hand, snuffling the flame into a thin, vanishing wisp of smoke. "Until you start thinking of it that way, you're only playing with matches." He demonstrated by creating a thin, needle-like lance of concentrated flame extended from his fingertip, the same principle as his compressed explosion but elongated. He swept the lance across a training dummy without igniting the surrounding material. "Precision applications," DABI said, the lance vanishing. "Not just throw fire at the problem and hope it works." Again, what he didn't explain was the technique's complexity. "So stop treating your left side like a backup plan instead of an integral part of your fighting style," DABI continued. "Because of that hesitation, you're operating at maybe 60% of your potential." Todoroki was silent, his gaze fixed on the molten line on the dummy. "That's fair," DABI pointed. "That's the habit we're breaking. You need to reach a point where fire and ice are equally instinctive, where you can switch between them or use both at the same time without having to think about it." Understood." Todoroki nodded quietly. "Did you now? Undoing a lifetime of trauma and conditioning isn't simple." DABI's voice softened slightly. "But you're not that scared kid anymore. You're not bound by his rules or his expectations. You're Shoto Todoroki, and both sides of your power are yours. So start acting like it." Something shifted in Todoroki's expression, a hardening of resolve. Then, DABI turned his focus toward Bakugo. "And you," DABI said, his eyes narrowing. "Your quirk is extraordinary. Explosive sweat generated from your palms, ignited at will, creating blasts with serious concussive force. And the mobility it gives you is top tier." Bakugo's aggressive posture softened slightly. Compliments from DABI were rare enough to pay attention to. "But you're wasting 30% of your potential because you prioritize raw power over control release. You treat your quirk like a hammer when it should be a scalpel. Every blast you throw is maximum output. It looks great for the cameras, but it drains your reserves and wrecks your joints faster than it normally could have. So what, you want me to use weaker explosions?" Bakugo's tone was defensive. "I want you to use smarter explosions," DABI corrected. "Variable output based on need." Bakugo scowled but didn't argue. He had felt that limitation himself during extended battles. "Watch, I'll give you a light demonstration." DABI raised his right hand. The same orange flames gathered in his palm, but instead of billowing outward, they began to collapse inward. He compressed the fire, spinning it into a tight, screaming sphere. The heat intensified as the fire folded over itself again and again, becoming a dense, vibrating orb. Then he released it. The compressed fireball shot forward with explosive force. It hit the training dummy with a sharp, metallic crack that mimicked the exact acoustic signature of Bakugo's blasts. Both students stared. "Now you can use my quirk too?" Bakugo roared, his eyes nearly popping out of his head. "What the hell kind of copycat bullshit is this?" It was almost the same, and the only difference was the range. Bakugo's was a palm-to-face detonation, while DABI had just sniped a target from across the yard. "Copycat? I like the sound of that. But don't call me that again," DABI said with a dry, dangerous chuckle as the residual heat dissipated. "Anyway, it's a similar principle to your quirk," DABI explained. "Explosions are just rapid combustion with concentrated force behind them. My fire doesn't naturally pop, but I can force it to, by compressing the flames to critical density before I let go. I can replicate that concussive impact you are naturally gifted due to your quirk. What he didn't explain, and what neither student needed to know, was again the complexity behind that technique. DABI's fire quirk allowed him to generate and manipulate flames, but creating explosion-like effects required understanding the fundamental physics of combustion. He had to use his flames to superheat a pocket of air while simultaneously wrapping it in a high-pressure skin of fire to prevent it from venting. He had to create a perfect pressure differential, and when the containment failed, the air expanded violently. It was an artificial detonation. Bakugo's quirk did all of this instinctively through his sweat's chemical composition. DABI had to manually recreate every step through pure technical mastery. The result was similar but not identical. DABI's version lacked the raw concussive force of Bakugo's natural explosions but made up for it in precision and controllability. The point, DABI continued, is it that your quirk can do this naturally? You just need to stop being so loud about it. Use small, precise pops for mobility and misdirection. Use medium blasts for sustained pressure. And save the big bang for when you actually have something worth killing. He demonstrated again, this time creating 3 compressed fireballs in rapid succession, each a different size. Small, medium, and large, each detonating with proportionally scaled force. Variable output, DABI emphasized. Right now you're burning yourself out in the first 5 minutes of any serious fight because you only know one setting, maximum. Learn to modulate, and your combat endurance triples. Bakugo was silent, his eyes fixed on his own palms, his mind clearly re-evaluating the all-or-nothing philosophy he had carried since childhood. Also, your fighting style is too straightforward, DABI added. You rely on aggression and overwhelming force, which works against weaker opponents, but leaves you vulnerable against anyone with decent defensive capabilities. He meant every word of his. If Bakugo started thinking while still fighting with that same ferocity, he'd become far more dangerous. It was something that would come naturally over time, but DABI intended to accelerate that process. Now, DABI stepped back, giving them space. Here's how this works. You two are going to fight each other, and I will be observing, breaking down your decisions in real time, and pointing out exactly where you're going wrong. Finally, Bakugo's face split into a savage, jagged grin. I've been waiting for another shot at this half-and-half bastard. Likewise, Todoroki replied coolly, though his flames were already igniting on his left side. One more thing, DABI added. Bakugo, you're only allowed to use explosions at 70% maximum output. Forces you to rely on technique instead of pure power. What? Again with this kind of bullshit? It dragged his mind back to that recent fight with Midoriya, the one where DABI had pushed him just to force out Black Whip. It's called training. Deal with it, DABI said flatly. And Todoroki, you're required to use fire and ice in equal measure. I am tracking, so if you use more ice than fire, the session ends and we start over tomorrow with the same handicap. Todoroki's eyes widened slightly. That's non negotiable. You want my training? Those are the conditions. DABI pulled out his phone to record. Now get into position. When I say start, you have 30 seconds to impress me. Begin. Bakugo launched forward immediately, explosions propelling him at high speed. But instead, he used a series of rapid-fire, low-yield bursts to zigzag through the air. He was fast, but the restraint was clearly chafing. Sloppy. DABI's shout cut through the sound of explosions. Those bursts aren't controlled. They're just weaker. There's a difference between lowering your power and mastering your output. Todoroki responded with an ice wall but caught himself mid-formation. Fire erupted from his left hand, melting a path through his own ice while creating a steam cloud that obscured Bakugo's vision. Finally using both sides without having a mental breakdown about it, DABI called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. It only took you half the match to remember you have 2 quirks. Bakugo emerged from the steam with a spinning kick enhanced by precisely timed explosions, and the attack forced Todoroki to block with an ice shield. Predictable, Dabi barked. Bakugo, you telegraphed that kick 3 moves ago. Todoroki saw it coming from a mile away. Bakugo shattered the ice shield with a follow-up blast. But Todoroki had already anticipated the move. The moment the ice broke, flames shot through the gaps, forcing Bakugo to abort his advance. Better, Dabi admitted grudgingly, but that fire timing was shit. Half a second slower and Bakugo would have been inside your guard, with a fist in your teeth. For a fleeting moment, Dabi's focus wavered. His vision flickered, where something familiar surfaced. Genetic milestone system, 3 evolution paths, breath of the sun, 100 out of 100%. Super soldier, 100 out of 100%. Arachnid genome, 34 to 41, out of 100%. Lifespan left, 120 plus years. The progression registered automatically, tracking his continuous physical and quirk training. 7% increase. Honestly, it was faster than he had imagined, probably accelerated by the intense training sessions he had been putting himself through too. But that wasn't what caught his attention. As Todoroki's ice spread across the training ground, crystalline formations glittering in the afternoon light, Dabi felt something. And it wasn't a spider sense warning of danger. It was a pull, deep biological recognition of something he should be capable of, yet hadn't quite grasped. He had known intellectually that his quirk possessed the genetic potential for it. His mother's gene factor dormant beneath his father's overwhelming fire genetics. The battle with Gigantomachia had forced the awakening, triggered by desperation and enhanced biology reaching critical thresholds. But this feeling was different. This sensation was anticipation. Like standing at a door he was about to open, close enough to feel the cold air seeping through the cracks, but not quite ready to turn the handle. The 40% threshold on the arachnid genome and approaching the halfway point. He could feel his body changing at the cellular level, enhanced healing that had eliminated the cancer entirely, physical capabilities that exceeded even his super soldier baseline, and spider sense that grew more refined with each passing day. But there was more coming, and he could sense it the way you sense approaching weather. The 50% mark would bring something significant. And beyond that, what happens when I hit 100? He wondered. The thought stirred a level of excitement he hadn't expected. Years ago, he hadn't even thought that far ahead. Back then, all his focus had been on survival and getting stronger one day at a time. Now, with this unknown potential, this possibility of something far greater, he couldn't help but feel a quiet, growing excitement. Todoroki's flames interrupted his thoughts, snapping him back to the present. The entire distraction had lasted maybe 2 seconds. Neither student had noticed his momentary lapse in attention, too absorbed in their own combat to track his micro-expressions. Dabi shoved the system notifications into the back of his head, re-anchoring himself into the training field. The 30 seconds ended with both breathing hard but grinning. Not bad, Dabi admitted, but I counted 15 critical errors that would have gotten you killed against a pro. Let's take it from the top. For the next hour, Dabi ran them through the same exchange repeatedly, each time pointing out specific mistakes and adjustments. His earlier demonstrations had set the tone. He wasn't just theorizing about their quirks. He could replicate their techniques, understand them from the inside out, and that gave his instruction weight that pure observation never could. When he told Bakugo to compress his explosions more tightly, Bakugo had already seen him demonstrate the same principle with fire. And when he urged Todoroki to blend his elements more fluidly, Todoroki had watched him shift flame color and temperature with precise control. They couldn't dismiss his advice as academic theory, and he had proven he understood their quirks on a fundamental level. By the 6th repetition, the progress was clear. Bakugo's explosions had shifted from brute force to deliberate strategy, his movement patterns harder to read. Todoroki was finally relying more on his fire, transitioning between ice and flame with far greater fluidity. "Okay, you're not complete garbage anymore," DABI observed. "Take 5 minutes, hydrate yourself, and then we move to phase 2. Both students collapsed where they stood, gulping water desperately. "Only 5 minutes?" Todoroki wheezed, his chest heaving. "You want more rest? Go home. This is training, not a spa day." The 5 minutes passed too quickly. "All right, break's over." DABI's voice cut through their attempted recovery. "Phase 2 starts now." Both students struggled to their feet, muscles protesting. "And this time, I am joining the fight." That got their full attention. "You're working together this time. 2 against 1, DABI said. "The main objective is simple. Land a clean hit on me by any means necessary, while mine is to avoid getting touched and punish every mistake you make along the way." "Wait, we're teaming up against you?" Todoroki sounded a bit skeptical. "About God time." Bakugo's expression was pure savage enthusiasm. "I have been waiting for this since day 1. Don't get too excited," DABI said flatly. "I am not using full power, that would defeat the purpose. But I'm still leagues ahead of where you two are sitting. If you don't coordinate, I'm going to make you regret wasting my afternoon." Todoroki and Bakugo exchanged glances, not quite friendly, but assessing each other's capabilities with new consideration. "Can't handle it?" DABI challenged, his eyes glinting. "Too proud? Too competitive? Then get the hell out of my sight and go back to the mediocre drills." "We can work together," Todoroki said, his voice firm despite his exhaustion. "TCH, just don't slow me down half and half," Bakugo muttered. "Then prove it." DABI settled into a deceptively relaxed stance, his hands tucked loosely in his pockets. "Unlimited time. I won't make the first move. Plan your approach, and try not to make this embarrassingly easy for me." For a moment, neither student moved. Then they turned to each other and fell into a quick, hushed exchange. Strategy taking shape, tactics argued in urgent undertones. Soon they attacked together, but the outcome was brutal. They were overwhelmed again and again, the cycle repeating until the end of the day. By the time training finally ended, they were limping their way toward Recovery Girl's office. The weeks leading to final exams had been brutal for Class 1A. DABI's training sessions with Bakugo and Todoroki continued daily, but they weren't the only ones nearing their limits. The entire class had thrown themselves into improvement with single-minded determination, because DABI had made one thing very clear during a class meeting 2 weeks before exams. "In the upcoming finals, I expect 100% pass rate from Class 1A, he had said, his voice flat and absolute. "Both written and practical. If anyone fails," another pause, longer this time, "well, use your imagination about what happens then." The threat was never articulated, which only made it more terrifying, and no one wanted to find out what DABI's version of summer school would look like. So they studied until their eyes bled. Yaoyorozu took her class representative role to extreme responsibility, organizing marathon study groups for Jiro, Kaminari, Ashido, Ojiro, and Siro. She lectured them on theory, drilled them on applications, and created practice problems that mimicked the exam format. Midoriya's notebook collection expanded exponentially as he documented every conceivable scenario they might face. Even Bakugo, who normally refused group study, could be found aggressively drilling Kirishima on hero law. His excuse? "I am not letting your dumbass drag down the class average. Shitty hair." The written exams arrived with the weight of accumulated preparation behind them. 3 hours, multiple subjects. Hero law, quirk theory, rescue protocols, villain psychology, ethics, and philosophy of heroism. When results were posted 2 days later, the entire class gathered around the board. Class 1A, 100% pass rate. Cheers erupted. Kaminari actually sobbed with relief while Ishido tackled Yaoyorozu into a hug that nearly sent them both to the floor. The practical exam briefing took place the following morning. All of Class 1A assembled in the auditorium, eagerly waiting to finally learn the practical exam concept. They have heard from Class 1B that the practical exam was a repeat of the entrance trials. Large-scale combat against mechanical opponents, difficult but straightforward. Principal Nizu stepped onto the stage, his cheerful smile appearing significantly more predatory than usual. "Good morning, students. My heartfelt congratulations on your written performance. Now, let's discuss the practical examination." The class leaned forward attentively. "You will be fighting in pairs against..." Nizu paused for dramatic effect. "The UA teaching staff." Silence, then chaos. "What? The teachers? Are you serious?" But 1B said it was robots. "We lied to 1B. Aizawa's gravelly voice cut through the panic. He was leaning against the back wall, looking as exhausted as ever. "We fed them false intel to ensure you couldn't prepare. Lesson 1. Never trust a source you haven't verified yourself with." The betrayal felt physical and several students looked like they had been slapped. "The matchups are as follows." Nizu continued, pulling up a screen. Azui and Tokoyami versus Ectoplasm. Ida and Ojiro versus Power Loader. Todoroki and Yaoyorozu versus DABI. Todoroki's head snapped up. His eyes immediately sought out the back of the room, locking onto DABI's silhouette. Their gazes met. DABI's expression was unreadable, but Todoroki's was intense, focused, almost hungry. And finally, Nizu's voice rose over the murmurs. "Midoriya and Bakugo versus All Might." That announcement sent another murmur wave through the room, but Todoroki barely registered it. After weeks of brutal training, he learned to properly integrate his fire and ice and pushed himself harder than he ever had before. This wasn't just an exam. It's a rematch, or more like a rematch. But this time, Shoto didn't intend to lose. After the briefing ended, the auditorium emptied into a flurry of frantic prepping amongst the students. However, Shoto remained anchored to his seat, his mismatched eyes fixed on a specific matchup. "Todoroki, you've been silent for 5 minutes." Yaoyorozu sat beside him, her posture poised, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of the same anxiety gripping the rest of the class. She was his partner. Alas, if only he didn't seem too lost in his own world. They could have been the perfect team. "I am fine," Shoto replied. "Thinking about fighting our battle with Dabi-sensei?" She guessed. "Yes." Yaoyorozu was quiet for a moment. "He's been training you specifically for weeks. Do you think that gives us an advantage or a disadvantage?" "Both," Shoto said honestly. "He knows exactly how I fight now, but I have been watching him too. I also know how he thinks and analyzes and what he expects. That's amazing. We won't stand a chance." The bluntness of his words stalled her. "We can't just give up before. It is impossible to win against him if he is even 10% serious." Shoto interrupted, his gaze finally shifting to hers. "And with his attitude, I am positive he will give himself an extra handicap to make it fair. But even then, if we use normal methods, our failure is certain." "Aren't the teachers already wearing super compact weighted bracelets as handicaps?" is what Yaoyorozu wanted to ask, but she could guess Todoroki knew it too. She went silent, unable to find a counter-argument to the grim conviction in his voice. "Our method has to be the crudest possible," Shoto continued. "I see. An unconventional approach," she murmured, her hand reaching for a notepad. "Then we must plan as carefully as..." "No, Yaoyorozu." "That is precisely what he expects from us." She blinked, her pen hovering in midair. "Then, what are you suggesting we do?" "Trust." "Trust?" she repeated. the word feeling foreign in the context of a high-stakes combat exam. Shoto nodded. I am trusting you to come up with something in the middle of the fight. My only responsibility is to hold his attention. I have to make him focus on me so completely that he forgets you, at least momentarily. Yaoyorozu hadn't expected such a reckless proposal from the usually stoic Todoroki, but it laid bare the depth of his desperation to defeat DABI. For Shoto, his pairing felt like destiny. A rematch again after the intense training he went through in an unofficial setting. For him, this wouldn't be just another exam, but a confrontation he had been waiting for, craving, even, since the moment his eldest brother had returned to their lives. He wanted to fight Toya, to prove himself and defeat him no matter the cost. And DABI? He knew he would be even less merciful, since this is an official setting. Yaoyorozu let out a slow, bracing breath. It makes sense, especially without knowing what kind of handicap he will choose. I suppose a desperate gamble is the best plan we have. The paired students were given a preparation window before the battle began. And even though they chose to not plan anything, Momo Yaoyorozu couldn't help but itch for data. She needed to understand the monster they were about to face. DABI-sensei is a tougher opponent than even All Might in some respects, Shoto said, his voice dropping into a somber, warning tone. According to him, All Might's devastating power was largely close-range, reliant on overwhelming physical prowess. A one-trick pony at the absolute peak of that trick, but still fundamentally limited in tactical flexibility. Though if you ask DABI, it is more likely he would not agree to this. But DABI? He had long-range firepower that could control entire battlefields. On top of it, he has close combat skills that match most veterans and a tactical mind that identifies your weaknesses before you even realize you've exposed them. In all these weeks, Todoroki hasn't found a single exploitable opening. As he finished his grim breakdown, Shoto turned and began walking toward the industrial zone of the testing grounds. Wait! Momo called out, jogging to catch up with him. Where are you going? We haven't even received his coordinates yet. The exam area is massive. We need to establish a systematic search grid. For the first time, Todoroki's expression shifted, a ghost of a knowing smile crossing his stoic features. I know exactly where he is, Shoto said without turning back. He must be at the exit gate, maybe even taking a nap. The observation was so unexpectedly perceptive, so rooted in a deep understanding of their instructor's character rather than just his quirk, that Momo found herself genuinely impressed despite her frustration. How can you possibly be so sure? She asked. Because it's what he would do, Shoto said simply. Why waste energy searching for us when we have to come to him eventually? The gate is the objective. He will just wait for us to exhaust ourselves getting there, then make us go through him to finish it. They found him exactly where Shoto predicted. DABI sat on the ground near the exit gate, one leg crossed casually over the other, looking completely at ease. But he wasn't sleeping or meditating. Instead, he had his phone pressed to his ear. Even from a distance, they could hear the softer tone in his voice that was so different from his usual harsh teaching style. Yeah, I know, Bunny. I will be careful. No, they are not here yet. Yeah, probably another few minutes. Miss you too. Shoto didn't need to ask who was on the other end. Nobody else in the world could make DABI's voice go that soft except Rumi Usajiyama. The moment DABI noticed their approach, likely triggered by his spider sense, DABI wrapped up the call with a quick goodbye. He pocketed the phone and rose to his feet in one jump. The transition back to instructor mode was instantaneous. Took you longer than expected, he said, and before he had even finished speaking, blue flames erupted from his skin. The fire spread across the ground in a perfect circle around him, maybe 3 meters in radius. It was a clear boundary marker. The heat radiating from those flames was immediately oppressive and distorting the haze that made the exit gate behind him look like a fever dream. Rules are simple, DABI continued. If I step outside this circle, you win. Either cuff me or get one of you past the gate within 30 minutes. That's it. The gate stood directly behind him, and suddenly the task sounded simple. Just ran past him and couldn't leave the circle. Except DABI would never make it that easy. Shoto didn't hesitate. Ice erupted from his right side in massive, jagged spears, shooting forward with lethal intent. Before the frost could even settle, a torrent of fire followed from his left. It was simultaneous assault using both elements together. Yaoyorozu, momentarily startled by the sheer ferocity of his opening move, scrambled into motion. She quickly began creating a metal staff from her quirk, preparing to provide support. But DABI's response wasn't what either of them expected. Instead of meeting Shoto's direct assault with a countersurge, a lance of sapphire flame shot past Todoroki, aimed directly at Yaoyorozu. His move only had one goal: to eliminate the support player before she could become a factor. Shoto saw it instantly. He pivoted mid-charge, a massive glacier of ice erupting between the blue flames and his partner, while his own fire was redirected to vaporize the residual heat before it could reach her. At that moment, the realization hit Momo. When Shoto had said he would hold DABI's attention while she came up with a plan to neutralize him, he hadn't been being modest. He was fully aware that he couldn't beat DABI alone, perhaps not even with her help in a straightforward clash. But he was willing to throw himself into the fight with everything just to buy her the seconds she needed to think. He was relying entirely on her tactical ability. Her eyes shone with determination as understanding struck. Her eyes sharpened with a new, fierce clarity. She fell back immediately, shielding herself and beginning to construct a series of specialized components as her mind began to tear the environment apart, looking for the win. Shoto, meanwhile, threw himself back at the circle with a renewed aggression. The fight escalated rapidly, but there was something different about this clash. It lacked the normal feel of a student-teacher exercise. Todoroki was fighting with a frantic, uncharacteristic edge. And he is using methods that didn't suit his normally reserved personality at all. He was digging deep, pulling at every thread of connection he had to the man in the center of that circle. Remember this scar on my face, Toya? Shoto's voice carried an edge Momo had never heard before as he launched another combination attack. Ice from the ground and fire from above, trying to create overlapping threat vectors. Our mother gave me this when I was 5. She poured boiling water on me because she couldn't stand to see Endeavor's face in mine anymore. He created another ice barrier, using it as cover to reposition. You know what that's like, don't you? Shoto shouted over the roar of the blue flames. Being broken and scared by the very people who were supposed to be our shelter. We're the same, aren't we? Even a kid could guess that Shoto's provocation was a tactic. It was something he had clearly gleaned from watching Bakugo, though he lacked the blonde's natural, explosive vitriol. Yes, desperate times called for desperate measures. DABI deflected the ice with a wall of blue flame, his expression never changing. Gee, trying to use psychology against me now? Did Bakugo teach you that? Or did you come up with it yourself? There was no way DABI would accept that Shoto learned that from him. And while Bakugo used aggressive language in fights, it wasn't tactical but simply part of who he was. Loud and unfiltered rather than calculated. To prove the point, DABI launched a needle-thin flame toward a gap in Shoto's stance, forcing the younger boy to twist into a desperate defensive block rather than pressing the advantage. The calm dismissal had the opposite effect of what Shoto intended. Instead of throwing DABI off balance, it riled Shoto up. His attacks became more aggressive, the control he'd worked so hard to gain beginning to fray at the edges. Ice and fire poured from him in greater volumes, the temperature fluctuations making the air shimmer and crack with thermal stress. But DABI handled it all with almost casual ease, even with his movement restricted to a 3-meter radius. Your fire control is sloppy there, See how it disperses? You're wasting heat on empty air instead of concentrating it where it matters. Shoto gritted his teeth, pulling his flames into a tighter, more tighter column. Better. Still not enough temperature, though. DABI critiqued, parrying the blast with a backhand of sapphire heat. Endeavor would eat these sparklers for a midnight snack. You need at least another 300 degrees before you're a real threat. Ice spears came next, and DABI melted them with a gesture. Every time Yaoyorozu attempted to flank or launch a creative opening, DABI would snap a precision blast her way. It was never enough to seriously harm her, just enough to force her back and remind her that he was tracking every move on the battlefield, despite his focus on Shoto. Minutes passed. Shoto was giving everything he had, pushing both sides of his quirk to their limits in ways he had never sustained before. Fire and ice in constant rotation, sometimes simultaneous, creating massive temperature swings that would hospitalize most opponents from thermal shock alone. But Shoto didn't let up. He promised Yaoyorozu that he would create a distraction, and he intends to hold it. From the sidelines, Momo watched the exchange. All her previous attempts had been distractions, probing attacks to test responses while she observed and analyzed. Finally, Momo landed on the real win condition. The fire circle was the key and not DABI himself, and the rules stated that if DABI left the circle, he lost. But what if there was no circle to leave? If the flames were extinguished, the boundary ceased to exist. Technically, he would be outside his circle even while standing in the same spot. It was a gamble on the technicality of the rules, but it was the only path through his overwhelming defense. The problem was execution. DABI's blue flames weren't ordinary fire. They could burn at temperatures approaching 2000 degrees Celsius. She doubted his flames actually reached that extreme, but they were clearly hot enough that conventional suppressants would fail before making contact. Water would flash into steam before it even crossed the perimeter. Standard foam would simply become more fuel. And worse, DABI would notice any attack on the flames immediately. His control over his quirk was absolute. He would know the instant his fire was threatened and could simply reignite it faster than any suppression could take effect. Unless the suppression happened so fast he couldn't react. All at once, across the entire circle simultaneously, with enough force and the right chemical composition to overwhelm even his temperature advantage. Momo's mind raced through chemical formulas, material compositions, and deployment mechanisms. I need something that can withstand the initial heat long enough to deliver its payload. Something that activates on contact with the flame instead of relying on gradual application and triggers an endothermic reaction strong enough to drop the temperature below the combustion threshold in an instant. From her body, she began creating components, not a single device, which would be too obvious and easy for DABI to counter. Instead, she began producing small, palm-sized canisters disguised as defensive items. She placed them carefully around the battlefield as she moved through his warning shots. Each canister contained a two-stage compound, an aerosol delivery system wrapped in heat-resistant ceramic casing. Its insides are filled with a modified halon replacement agent combined with liquid nitrogen under pressure. When triggered, the casing would shatter from internal pressure, releasing the suppressant in an instantaneously expanding cloud that would simultaneously displace oxygen and create a flash freeze effect. One canister wouldn't be enough and DABI would just reignite. But 12 canisters, positioned in a ring around his flame circle, all triggered at the same time. That might have worked for exactly the 2 seconds needed before he recovered and reestablished the boundary. Todoroki! Momo shouted. It's about time I proved you right when you decided to put your trust in me. So when I give the signal, create the largest ice wall you can directly in front of him. Block his view of me completely. Shoto, breathing hard from continuous assault, didn't question, just nodded once. Momo continued her movements as she placed the final canisters while Shoto kept DABI's attention focused forward. The components were small enough and numerous enough that they blended with the general debris of combat, chunks of ice, scorch marks, and discarded creation attempts. DABI was saying something, probably another harsh criticism of Shoto's technique, but Momo wasn't listening anymore. Instead was counting and calculating the timing. Almost there. Just need the right moment when he's fully committed to blocking Todoroki's attack. Shoto launched his most overwhelming assault yet. He unleashed a gargantuan, dual-element spiral, towering vortex of frost and flame that roared toward the circle. It was a technique that had nearly broken him during training, requiring every scrap of his remaining stamina to keep the elements from collapsing into a chaotic mess. DABI's response was immediate. Blue flames erupting to meet the attack head-on, his full attention on the massive threat bearing down on him. Now! Momo screamed. Trusting blindly, Shoto slammed his right hand down, creating a massive ice wall directly between himself and DABI, blocking the fire user's line of sight for 1 critical second. Yaoyorozu triggered all 12 canisters simultaneously via a remote detonator she had created. The effect was instantaneous and terrifyingly silent. The heat-resistant casings shattered in perfect synchronization. The pressurized liquid nitrogen and modified halon agent erupted in an expanding, supersonic ring. The reaction was violently endothermic as the chemicals tore the thermal energy out of the air with such force that the surrounding temperature plummeted hundreds of degrees in a blink. DABI's blue flames didn't sputter or fight. They just went out at once. The sudden absence of heat was shocking after minutes of oppressive temperature, and the ground where the flames had burned was flash-frozen, covered in a thin layer of frost from the liquid nitrogen. Momo was already moving, sprinting for the gate the millisecond the suppressant cleared. Shoto, catching the rhythm instantly, followed on her heels without a second of hesitation. For exactly 1.3 seconds, DABI stood in the center of the void, his eyes wide with a rare, genuine spark of surprise. Chemical suppression with endothermic flash freeze? He recognized it instantly, deployed simultaneously across the entire perimeter to prevent gradual reignition. Actually really smart. Nice try, DABI said. Even through the grit of his voice, there was an unmistakable note of approval. Blue flames erupted beneath his feet again, spreading outward in a new circle. Rules say I lose if I leave my circle, DABI clarified, voice carrying across the frozen ground. Never said I couldn't make a new circle once the old one was gone, and I never left the original position, so technically I never broke the boundary condition. DABI was literally spouting nonsense at this point. Momo skidded to a halt, her boots sparking against the ice. Her heart sank as her mind raced to process the logic. That's legal, DABI finished. Yeah, welcome to hero work where villains don't fight fair either. Now, you have got 15 minutes left and you just used your best trick. What's plan B? Behind Momo, Shoto was already in motion, fire and ice building again for another push. DABI watched them, something sharp and unspoken settling behind his eyes. Pride he had never voiced, never would. Momo steadied herself, the hesitation gone as she recalibrated. Then DABI exhaled a quiet laugh. Nah, I am kidding. I lost. The blue flames vanished instantly. Well played, Yaoyorozu, he added, brushing ash from his jacket. The circle's gone. I am out of bounds, so this one's yours. His gaze shifted briefly to Shoto. You both win. He stepped aside, motioning toward the exit. Go on before I change my mind and call a technical on you for taking too long after winning. As they moved past, Momo caught his voice, low enough that it barely carried. You did well too, Shoto. DABI already had his phone out again, his posture looser now, like something had settled. Shoto kept walking, shoulders tight, hands still faintly trembling, whether from exertion or something unresolved. Even he wasn't sure. Behind them, DABI's voice drifted on the wind. Yeah, Bunny, I am back. They passed. Yep. I am proud too. While the battle between the Todoroki brothers took place in the industrial zone, the other 9 pairs of Class 1A were scattered across the sprawling urban landscape of Ground Beta, each facing their own opponents. Before departure, Aizawa's brief. 10 teams in 10 separate battle zones. You will be transported by bus to your assigned sectors. The rules are simple. Either capture your assigned teacher with the handcuffs provided, or get at least 1 team member past the exit gate. You have 30 minutes. It's a 2-way pass. Accomplish either one, and you're through. He had tapped the heavy, metallic bands around his own wrists. The teachers will be wearing super compact weighted bracelets, courtesy of support course student May Hatsum, to handicap themselves. Do not mistake that for mercy. We are still pro heroes and you are still students. Treat this like a life or death struggle, or you will fail. The matchups were once again displayed. Principal Nizu versus Kaminari and Ishido, 13 versus Aoyama and Uraraka, Present Mike versus Koda and Jiro, Ectoplasm versus Tokoyami and Azui, Midnight versus Siro and Shinso, Snipe versus Shoji and Hagakure, Cementos versus Kirishima and Sato, and finally Power Loader versus Ida and Ojiro. For Hitoshi Shinso, the stakes were even higher. After weeks of brutal and exclusive training under Aizawa's tutelage, this wasn't just an exam. It would determine his potential transfer to the hero course, and everything rode on his performance. In the central observation room, Recovery Girl sat surrounded by monitors, her gaze sharp. She knew the medical wing was about to get very busy. Sector 4. Cementos versus Kirishima and Sato. Cementos sat at the center of the zone, his palms pressed to the pavement. He reshaped the battlefield with his quirk, Cement. Walls rose, streets collapsed, buildings shifted, turning the area into a 3-dimensional maze designed to separate and isolate the students. They won't be able to bypass this through strategy. Cementos murmured, his voice calm. I will simply bury them in sheer volume. But a sudden, thunderous crack echoed through the canyon of stone. Unbreakable! Kirishima didn't go over the wall. He didn't look for a way around. His hardening activated at maximum output, skin turning to literal rock as he charged straight through Cementos's barriers. Stone shattered into dust as Kirishima tore through the obstacle, his roar echoing off the artificial skyscrapers. Right on his heels was Sato, his veins bulging from a high-dosage sugar rush. Sato followed in the wake of Kirishima's, his fists acting as sledgehammers that demolished the remnants of whatever Kirishima hadn't already pulverized. These kids. Cementos's eyes widened behind his rectangular mask. He slammed his hands down again, raising a series of reinforced ramparts. He watched in genuine shock as Kirishima shattered the first one with a reinforced headbutt, barely losing momentum. When did they become this durable? As he watched them, Cementos realized it wasn't just their quirks that had evolved. It was their mentality. There was a frantic, almost desperate hunger in the way they moved. They weren't fighting like students worried about a grade. They were fighting like survivors who had seen the bottom of a pit and refused to go back. You've turned them into monsters, DABI? Cementos thought, a chill running down his spine. It was indeed the result of DABI's brutal conditioning. Kirishima's hardening now lasted significantly longer under stress, and Sato's sugar management was precise enough to maintain enhancement without the usual crash. They moved like a 2-man wrecking crew, Kirishima breaking through defenses and Sato capitalizing on openings. By the 15-minute mark, the normally stoic Cementos was actually sweating, forced to burn through his own stamina just to keep the boys from reaching the escape gate through sheer, unadulterated brute force. Sector 2. Ectoplasm versus Tokoyami and Azui. 30 clones of ectoplasm filled the zone, creating a numbers advantage that should have been overwhelming. Revelry in the dark, Tokoyami intoned. Dark shadow erupted, but it wasn't the erratic, flailing entity from months ago. It was leaner, its eyes glowing with a controlled, predatory fury. The training with DABI had paid off. Tokoyami had been trying to find the narrow equilibrium between restraint and the abyss. He had learned to trigger a surgical rampage, feeding Dark Shadow just enough darkness to match ectoplasm's numbers without letting the beast consume the man. Dark Shadow swept through clones like a scythe through wheat. Meanwhile, Azui used her superior mobility to navigate the chaos, tongue lashing out to bind clones, powerful legs propelling her across rooftops with frog-like agility. Ectoplasm, observing from a high catwalk, felt a prickle of unease. They aren't taken aback by the fact that they are outnumbered?
Sector 7. Principal Nesu vs Caminari y Ácido.
This battle was a masterful calculation. Nizu had turned the entire zone into a death trap. Pitfalls, collapsing structures, electrical hazards, chemical irritants. Every step was a potential disaster, and he was loving it. This is accelerating. Nizu's voice chirped from hidden speakers, ringing with a manic delight that made Ishido's skin crawl. Your movement patterns show a 47% improvement from last month's data, but can you handle this? Another trap slammed shut, and Kaminari moved with a twitch response that felt almost pre-programmed. He leaned into it, absorbing the rogue current and redirecting it into the ground with a controlled discharge. This is insane, Ishido screamed, sliding beneath a falling crane and melting the heavy cable with a focused, high-pH spray of acid. He's actually trying to kill us. No, just maiming at most. Nizu's cheerful voice replied. Though I must say, you two are performing admirably. Much better than predicted. Nizu was right. Kaminari's electrical control had improved dramatically. He could now discharge at precise voltages without short-circuiting his own brain, and Ishido's acid control was refined enough to adjust pH mid-spray. But Nizu was still Nizu. For every adaptation they made, he had 3 counter-traps ready. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and Nizu was having the time of his life. Sector 5. Midnight versus Zero and Shinso. This matchup was tactical chess. Midnight's somnambulous quirk meant close-range exposure was an instant knockout. But Zero's tape provided distance control, and Shinso's brainwashing offered a counter if he could make her respond verbally. Come on, boys, Midnight purred, releasing her quirk's aroma. Don't make the situation difficult. Sleep is so much kinder than what you've been doing in those extra sessions. Zero immediately created a tape mask for both of them, improvising respirators to filter the knockout gas. Shinso stayed silent, his eyes tracking Midnight's movements, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy his quirk. They were trained for this. Aizawa had drilled Shinso specifically on fighting opponents who knew about his brainwashing and taught him patience, timing, and psychological manipulation. The battle turned into a tense back and forth. Midnight trying to force verbal responses, Shinso waiting for her to slip, and Zero controlling space with tape webbing. It was tense, professional, and almost beautiful in its technical execution. In the central monitoring room, Recovery Girl watched all battles simultaneously. Several teachers who had finished their exams early had gathered to observe. These kids. Cementos shook his head, having just returned from his battle. I had to actually exert myself in the final minutes. When did they become this lethal? Blame DABI, Aizawa said flatly, observing Tokoyami's controlled dark shadow rampage with professional interest. He's been running them ragged for weeks. Extra training, individual focus, brutal conditioning, and this is the result. I would prefer to curse him, Cementos muttered, touching a bruised rib. Kirishima hit me with a headbutt that felt like a demolition ball. First year shouldn't have that much density behind his strikes yet. Complaining, Ishiyama? Aizawa's eyes flickered toward him. His expression remained a tired mask, but there was a razor-thin edge of something like satisfaction there. Impressed, actually. Cementos watched the monitors. concerned about the long-term implications of pushing students this hard, but impressed. Ectoplasm arrived next, looking genuinely winded. Tokoyami and Azui passed. Dark Shadow's control is disturbing, honestly. That much power with that much precision. 15 years old. 16 for Tokoyami, Aizawa corrected. And yes, DABI's training methods produce results. At what cost? Ectoplasm asked. The question wasn't an accusation, but a genuine professional concern. We will find out, Aizawa replied. For now, they're passing, and that's what matters. On the monitors, the final movements of the other sectors were concluding. There were successes and failures, but even those who fell short did so with a ferocity that made the staff take notice. The Class 1A that had started the semester was gone. In its place was something much sharper. And then, oh my! Recovery Girl leaned forward. All Might's battle is starting. This should be interesting. Every teacher in the room turned to watch. Sector 1. All Might versus Midoriya and Bakugo. All Might stood directly in front of the exit gate. Both his arms were on his hips, weighted bracelets visible on his wrists. Even with his power suppressed, the sheer pressure of his presence was enormously strong. Midoriya and Bakugo approached from opposite angles, moving in sync without a word exchanged between them. All Might looked at them, and for a fleeting second, the symbol of peace mask slipped, revealing warmth.
Bride.
These two had changed more than any other students in recent weeks. The growth was visible not just in quirk control but in their fundamental approach to heroism. Bakugo still carried his trademark snarl. That probably wouldn't change, but the casual death threats were gone. After Stain's intervention, Bakugo had learned the weight his words carried. Kill and die only came out when he genuinely meant them now. His loud mouth remained, but the malice had transformed into something more focused, and he was working with Midoriya. That alone was miraculous. Meanwhile, Midoriya had found his confidence. The self-deprecating stammering had diminished significantly. The black whip flickered at his fingertips, still being mastered but already combat viable, while One for All ran at 35% with minimal backlash. The strategic mind was still there, but backed by genuine combat capability now. All Might attacked first. Even handicapped by weighted bracelets, the symbol of peace was a blur of golden light. He crossed 50 meters in under a second, fist already moving toward Bakugo's center mass. Crack thrum. Black whip tendrils lashed out from Midoriya's position, pulling All Might's trajectory slightly off-center while simultaneously yanking Midoriya into striking range from an impossible angle. All Might adjusted mid-strike, but Bakugo had already read the shift. The explosion-propelled kick didn't come from where All Might had dodged to, but from where he had dodged from. Bakugo had anticipated the counter-movement, positioning himself in the blind spot before All Might had even finished landing. The symbol of peace blocked the kick with his forearm, and for the first time the impact actually registered. A dull thud echoed through the alleyway. All Might swept low, a leg sweep designed to take Bakugo's foundation out. Whoosh! Midoriya's black whip grabbed Bakugo around the waist and yanked him airborne. In the same motion, Midoriya released a secondary tendril that hooked All Might's sweeping ankle, using the momentum of the hero's own move to pull himself into a spinning, One for All enhanced kick. All Might blocked, but Bakugo was already descending from the sky. A two-handed explosion primed to detonate the exact microsecond All Might's guard was occupied by Midoriya. The symbol of peace had to actually move. He broke his stance to avoid taking both hits simultaneously. Not bad. All Might's voice boomed, genuine approval radiating from him. But can you keep up? He accelerated. What followed was unlike anything the observing students had seen before. All Might moved faster, still holding back significantly, but enough that most students would have lost track of him entirely. Midoriya and Bakugo didn't drown. Midoriya spun a web of black whip across the battlefield to give himself constant anchor points. He used them like a three-dimensional mobility system, launching himself at angles gravity shouldn't allow, repositioning faster than one for all alone could manage. Bakugo worked the opposite strategy. His explosion-propelled movement looked chaotic but followed precise vectors. Every blast served a dual purpose: locomotion and offense. He was never where All Might expected him to be, constantly flanking at angles that forced the symbol of peace to fracture his focus. And they were coordinating without words or even hand signals, through pure combat instinct developed from weeks of force partnership training. DABI was right, All Might thought, remembering a conversation from weeks ago. Those two, when they stop arguing and start working together, are going to be monsters. Time to see if that prediction held true. All Might feinted toward Midoriya. Bakugo's eyes flicked left for a fraction of a second. Midoriya immediately activated Black Whip to pull himself right, creating an opening. Bakugo filled it with a concentrated explosion blast aimed not at All Might but at the ground near his feet, creating a debris cloud and forcing upward movement. The instant All Might jumped, Midoriya was already airborne via tendril-assisted launch, one for all-enhanced kick coming from above. Simultaneously, Bakugo attacked from below with an explosion-propelled uppercut. All Might blocked both, but for the first time in the exam, he actually stepped backward from the combined force. The students were attacking in stereo, reading each other's intentions through microscopic cues, eye movements, weight shifts, and breathing patterns. They are creating combination attacks on the fly that require precise timing and complete trust. DKU. Bakugo's shout wasn't anger but a signal. Midoriya instantly understood. Black Whip. Shot toward Bakugo, wrapping around his torso. Bakugo detonated a massive explosion downward, launching himself and Midoriya in a spinning arc. At the apex, Midoriya released his grip, using One for All to redirect the attack while Bakugo continued the rotation. The result: Midoriya coming in high with a 35% Detroit smash, while Bakugo attacked low with an AP shot autocannon, a rapid-fire burst of concentrated explosions he had only recently mastered. All Might caught Midoriya's fist with one hand and swept Bakugo's assault with the other, but the coordination forced him to commit both hands to defense. The opening lasted a quarter second. Bakugo's eyes met Midoriya's mid-combat, and understanding passed between them wordlessly. Black Whip snaked from Midoriya's free hand, reaching not for the hero, but for the debris field Bakugo had created earlier. The tendril grabbed a chunk of concrete and whipped it toward All Might's blind spot. Simultaneously, Bakugo fired a stun grenade to create a flash and sound that would mask the concrete's approach. All Might dodged the concrete on pure instinct, stepping exactly where they wanted him. Into a Black Whip trap Midoriya had laid 3 exchanges ago, hidden beneath the rubble, activated now with perfect timing. The tendrils couldn't possibly restrain the symbol of peace, but they tangled his legs for exactly 1 second. And it was enough. Bakugo and Midoriya struck from opposite directions with full power, everything they had left in the tank. The impact forced a grunt of genuine effort from the symbol of peace. And then, impossibly, Bakugo grinned. It wasn't his usual mask of aggression. It was a fierce, pure expression of combat joy. That actually worked. Bakugo sounded delighted, the sound of a boy who had finally found an equal to stand beside. Midoriya was smiling too, adrenaline and exhilaration making his eyes bright. Kakin, left side opening. I see it. They moved as one, and All Might realized something remarkable. They weren't just fighting to pass the exam or even to survive, but they are enjoying it. They were savoring the challenge, the impossible coordination, and the sheer thrill of pulling off high-level maneuvers against the ultimate opponent. They had stopped being rivals forced to work together and become partners who competed through cooperation. Young Midoriya, young Bakugo. All Might's voice boomed with pride even as he countered their next assault. Magnificent! But I am not finished yet. He accelerated again, weighted bracelets straining against his increased output. The duo met him head-on without hesitation, and the battle reached heights that shouldn't have been possible for first-year students. Bakugo had learned to use explosions with surgical precision, variable output attacks that conserved sweat while maximizing tactical advantage. Small bursts provided mobility, medium blasts served for offense, and maximum output occurred only at critical moments, focused into concentrated streams rather than wasteful spherical explosions. Midoriya's Black Whip had become an extension of his tactical thinking. Every tendril served multiple purposes. Attack, defense, mobility, and misdirection all worked together, while one for all at 35% gave him the speed to capitalize on every opening Bakugo created. Together, they forced the symbol of peace to do the unthinkable. He had to actually strategize rather than just react. A feint from Midoriya drew All Might's guard high. Bakugo immediately struck low with a concussive blast that forced a block. Black Whip uses that moment of defense to reposition Midoriya for a follow-up strike, and Bakugo reads the counter, already moving to intercept All Might's transition with a barrage of blasts. Continuous pressure, constant adaptation, and zero wasted movement. It was beautiful. Their combat language, it's evolving in real time. All Might observed, his eyes shining with pride. Midoriya launched himself with Black Whip while Bakugo provided covering fire. The tendrils wrapped around All Might's arm to use as an anchor point, pulling Midoriya into a spinning kick that Bakugo's own explosion enhanced mid-flight, adding a terrifying centrifugal force to the impact. All Might caught the strike, but Bakugo was already behind him, having used the distraction to reposition via blast-assisted movement. Another combination, another narrow miss, and both boys were grinning like absolute maniacs. In the monitoring facility, the silence was absolute. The other students stood frozen, their eyes glued to the screens. Those two, Kirishima breathed. They're incredible. They look like pros out there. They are fighting on the same foot as All Might, Kaminari said, voice filled with awe. Yaoyorozu's analytical mind was racing. The coordination level is absurd, executing combination attacks that typically require weeks of dedicated partner training, reading each other through minimal cues, and adapting strategies in real time without verbal communication. When did that happen? Jiro asked. Bakugo and Midoriya working together without screaming at each other? Since when do they trust each other like that? On screen, Midoriya and Bakugo executed another impossible combination. Black Whip, creating a web that funneled All Might's movement, while Bakugo's explosions herded him toward the trap. To begin with, each of them is formidable on their own, Shoto said, his gaze fixed on the screen. His voice was steady, but there was a flicker of something intense behind his eyes. Together, they aren't just twice as strong. They're exponentially more dangerous. The battle raged on. All Might remained the dominant force, a golden titan who was still clearly superior in every metric. Yet, for the first time, he was forced to pause, to actually think about his counters rather than simply drowning them in raw power. Shoto watched his classmates push themselves beyond reasonable limits. His own exam with Yaoyorozu had ended in success, but it had been a victory of inches, snatched through technicalities and a desperate, clever gamble. But this was different. This was two students refusing to acknowledge the gap between themselves and the symbol of peace, refusing to accept defeat, throwing everything they had into the fight because that was what heroes did, and enjoying every second of it. Shoto's hands clenched at his sides. I need to get stronger, he realized, the thought cold and certain. They aren't going to wait for me to catch up. On screen, Midoriya and Bakugo launched their most complex combination yet, a three-stage attack that used Black Whip mobility, explosion redirection, and perfectly timed one for all strikes in a sequence so smooth it looked choreographed. All Might countered, but he was actually breathing hard now. Every person watching knew they were witnessing something special. The moment when students stopped being students and started becoming heroes. Even if they didn't win, they had already proven something more important than victory. They had proven they belonged on this battlefield. And when Midoriya Izuku and Bakugo Katsuki stopped fighting each other and started fighting together, they became exactly what DABI had predicted. Monsters. The very best kind of monsters that would save the world someday. The sudden crackle of the communication system broke the trance in the monitoring room. Attention! Recovery Girl's voice rang out, sharp and professional. The final battle of Class 1A's practical examination is concluding. All other matches have ended. All Might's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. His colleagues, Aizawa, DABI, 13, and Ectoplasm, had all been defeated by their student pairs. That was unprecedented. In the history of UA, such a sweep was unheard of. It was impressive, certainly, but it signaled a seismic shift in the caliber of this class. He turned his focus back to the two boys before him. All Might still stood tall, his legendary frame barely winded despite the intensity of the exchange. The two students before him, however, were in a different situation. Midoriya and Bakugo stood several feet away, both utterly ragged. All Might had been careful not to deal any serious injuries, but they were clearly beyond exhausted, both physically and mentally drained from sustaining that level of coordination and combat intensity. Bakugo's hands trembled violently, his palms raw and weeping from the relentless friction of his explosions. His sweat reserves were bone-dry. Midoriya swayed slightly, arms hanging toward the ground. Black whip dissipated entirely. One for all flickering weakly across his body, the 35% output he had maintained throughout the fight having taxed his stamina to the absolute limit. Giving up? All Might asked, though his tone was gentle rather than challenging. In truth, he wanted to end it here. They had already exceeded every reasonable benchmark for a first-year student, perhaps even for a seasoned sidekick. Continuing felt almost cruel, yet he had caught himself up in the thrill of it, mesmerized by the sheer audacity of their growth. And he still had more than enough time remaining in this form to maintain the facade for a while longer. His 5-hour limit hadn't been reached yet, but to hand them a victory now would be an insult. It would turn their masterpiece of a struggle into a participation trophy. To respect the blood and grit they had left on the pavement, he had to let them finish it. Bakugo's knees buckled slightly, his hands incapable of producing even a spark. Damn it! He rasped, the words catching in his dry throat. He's too strong. Way too strong. He had finally understood it completely. All Might wasn't just powerful, he was overwhelming. The gap between them wasn't something that could be bridged through tactics or combination attacks or clever strategies. All Might truly was the strongest hero, the world's most insurmountable wall. All Might's voice softened even further. You've both fought admirably. There is no shame in giving up. Bakugo interrupted, and despite his exhaustion, his trembling hands, and everything else, he grinned. I am just done with my warm-up. He took a step forward, matching Midoriya's advance. All Might smiled genuinely, warmly, with pride that filled his entire chest. These boys, they truly are the future. But his pride was his undoing. Because in that fraction of a second when All Might's guard relaxed with pride, when he was basking in the satisfaction of watching his students refuse to give up, Midoriya's eyes met Bakugo. Now, Bakugo dropped to the ground, flattening himself completely. Midoriya's black whip, which he had deliberately let dissipate to appear more exhausted than he actually was, suddenly erupted from both hands simultaneously. And it wasn't toward All Might, but the ground beneath All Might's feet. The tendrils wrapped around chunks of debris, creating a makeshift catapult. Midoriya pulled with every calorie of energy remaining in his muscles. The debris launched upward in a fragmented wall, hurtling toward All Might's face. The symbol of peace jumped backward on reflex, exactly where Bakugo had predicted. The explosion wasn't large. Bakugo had been telling the truth about his depleted reserves. But he had a blast that he saved for the final, agonizing gram of nitroglycerin sweat for this singular moment. He timed it to detonate at the exact instant of contact. The explosion wasn't meant to hurt All Might, but to create a smokescreen. And in that moment of obscured vision, they didn't try to win a fight they knew was unwinnable. Instead, they sprinted. They ignored the agony in their lungs and the trembling in their legs, bolting past the staggered hero toward the gate he had been guarding. All Might realized their play immediately. Clever, but he had been caught flat-footed, positioned wrong, momentum carrying him away from the gate rather than toward it. By the time he turned to pursue, Midoriya had already crossed the boundary line. The buzzer sounded. Both students collapsed the instant they crossed the threshold, completely spent. All Might stood there for a moment, then threw his head back and laughed, the full, booming All Might laugh that carried across the entire training ground. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Recovery Girl's voice came through the speakers again. Time is up. The end-of-term practical test is officially over. A brief, heavy pause followed. All students from Class 1A have passed the examination. Class 1A achieved a 100% pass rate on the final exams, which has never happened in UA history. Far from UA, in a dimly lit bar that smelled of stale alcohol and the lingering rot of poor decisions, Tamura Shigaraki stared at a photograph. Midoriya Izuku, green hair and determined eyes. Tamura's fingers wrapped around the photo, and it crumbled to dust between his fingertips. Annoying, he muttered as he reached up, scratching at the scarred skin of his neck in frantic agitation. Always getting in the way. The door opened, and the same well-dressed man from the hostess bar stepped in, accompanied by someone new. A boy, a teenager, really. Shigaraki, the broker said smoothly, adjusting his cuffs. I have brought someone who expressed a rather passionate interest in joining your League of Villains. Tamura looked up, red eyes narrowing with immediate distaste. The boy's expression, that arrogant, self-assured smirk, reminded him of the types he despised most. It reminded him of the NPCs he despised most. The ones who thought they were the main characters, the ones who believed the world was a game designed for their amusement. Kurojairi, Tamura said flatly, his voice like sandpaper. Send him away. I'm not running a daycare for brats. The misty bartender paused in his glass cleaning. Perhaps we should hear what he has to say first, Tamura Shigaraki. The broker has provided quality recruits in the past. We are in need of numbers. The service charge applies whether you like him or not, the broker added, examining a perfectly manicured nail. Might as well get your money's worth. At least let the boy introduce himself. Tamura scratched harder at his neck, clearly irritated but considering. Fine, Tamura finally conceded. You've got 1 minute. Make it interesting, or get the hell out before I lose my patience. The boy's smirk widened. My name, he said, his voice carrying just enough confidence to be irritating, is... Tamura's hand froze mid-scratch. The final exams had concluded with a statistical miracle. For the first time in UA history, a first-year class had achieved a perfect 100% pass rate, shattering every historical benchmark and leaving the faculty in a state of shock. The students were exhausted, and especially Class 1A was utterly spent. In a move that defied everything they knew about him, DABI hadn't just granted them 3 days off from training. On top of it, he added on an extra day of absolute rest. The students had their deep, mounting concerns about why this literal demon was suddenly showing such uncharacteristic kindness, but they were simply too exhausted to voice their suspicions. Also, pointing it out might remind him of who he was, and right now, survival meant silence. With the training fields empty, the UA campus halls got uncharacteristically quiet as students recovered. Some slept for 14 hours straight in their respective homes, few soaked in the baths, nursing bruises and pulled muscles. For DABI, things had also settled into a rhythm he was still getting used to. 2 kids in the family now, Eri and Toga. The apartment had aggressively transitioned from a bare-bones bachelor pad with a frequent flyer girlfriend to a loud, crowded ecosystem that screamed, "Somehow we are raising children and absolutely nobody planned this." It was chaos, thoroughly exhausting, and also surprisingly good. But right now, the kids weren't with them. DABI and Rumi were on an actual date, alone. It really had been a while, Rumi said, stretching luxuriously as they walked through the quieter shopping district. She was in civilian clothes, rare for her, though her rabbit ears were impossible to hide. DABI replied, but his hand found hers anyway. "We've got ourselves a full day, so let's make the most of it." Rumi leaning into his side. "They are with..." She paused, her ears twitching as she realized a gap in the logistics. "Actually, where did you say you dropped them off?" "With Ray," DABI said vaguely. "Your mom." Rumi stopped dead in her tracks, pulling him to a halt. "That's... wow, also really sweet of you, DABI. I know she has been doing so much better lately. Eri especially loves visiting her. Right?" She paused, considering. "Still, it would have been safer if I were with her." Rumi still hadn't fully recovered from the last villain attack, at least not mentally. "Stain's there on guard duty," DABI stated flatly. "If anyone tries anything, he will butcher them before they touch the door." She shook her head, exasperated. "By Stain, you mean the red scarf dude from your so-called Reformation squad. You put him on babysitting duty? He is surprisingly disciplined with kids. Don't swear around them," DABI defended, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Besides, Eri thinks his lack of a nose is funny. Her standard for trusting people is completely broken. Ours too, clearly," Rumi muttered, staring at him for a long, stunned moment before she completely lost it. Her laughter echoed down the quiet street, bright and unburdened. She grinned up at him, bouncing slightly on her toes to plant a quick, fierce kiss on his jaw. "Now come on. You promised me that new teppanyaki place, and I am holding you to every single calorie." Of course, the Hero Public Safety Commission hadn't handed Himiko Toga over out of the goodness of their bureaucratic hearts, especially with the recent actions of DABI Toya Todoroki, who now practically turned into an unguided missile, exceptionally lethal, and politically toxic to the top-ranked hero's reputation. Also, the number of weaknesses DABI has, the number of leverages they can have on him when push comes to shove. Meanwhile, at the psychiatric facility, very different scene was unfolding. Rei Todoroki sat in her comfortable room. However, the atmosphere within the room is completely contrary to months ago, with plants and natural light and 2 small visitors who have become increasingly regular fixtures in her recovery. Eri sat cross-legged on the floor, arranging flowers she asked her father to buy in a vase. Beside her, Himiko Toga watched with a quiet, cat-like fascination, her posture still carrying the slight stiffness of someone entirely unaccustomed to this strange new dynamic. Rei still wasn't entirely sure how she had arrived at this point in her life. One day, months ago, this small silver-haired girl had visited her during visiting hours. The child had stopped, looked at Rei with impossibly large, luminous red eyes, and said with absolute, unblinking gravity, "Hello, beautiful lady." Rei had blinked. I am sorry." But what could she have said to counter that? This tiny, ethereal child had looked at her with an effortless, unconditional acceptance, speaking with an earnest politeness that treated Rei's existence not as a tragedy to be pitied, but as a comfort. The visits had continued. Sometimes once a week, once every 2 weeks, or more and less frequently, dependent on the shadowy figures who escorted the child. Eri would bring colorful crayon drawings, unique pebbles she had found on her walks, or just sit and chatter about small things. The shape of the clouds, the taste of apples, or stories about the strict Papa DABI, who was teaching her how to read. And just recently, Ray wasn't sure exactly when or why, Eri had suddenly stopped calling her beautiful lady. Instead, she had started saying, Grandma. The first time the word left the child's mouth, Ray was taken aback. I am. Eri, your grandma. Eri had repeated, smiling like this was obvious. That night, Ray had cried. They were happy tears, confused tears, overwhelmed tears brought the memories of the past. She couldn't help but think, if her eldest were alive, he would have had a child Eri age. However, she allowed that thought to sit any longer. She understood. She can't be longing for what had already happened and needed to be present for her children that are present now. Anyway, she wasn't entirely sure if Eri truly understood the genetic weight of that word, or if Fuyumi asked her before a visit, or if the child had simply decided on her own that Ray belonged to her now. The child's past was unclear. Ray never asked for explanations. She knew nothing of the child's past, but she could recognize the faint, unmistakable shadow of trauma in the way Eri initially flinched at loud noises. But today was the first time Eri had brought someone else. Grandma, this is Toga, Eri had announced with immense, chest-puffing pride the moment the door swung open. She is my little sister now. Himiko Toga had hidden partially behind Eri, burying her face into the shoulder of Eri's small denim jacket. Her messy blonde buns were slightly askew, and her slitted golden eyes darted around the room. She was clearly less comfortable than Eri, and entirely unsure of this situation. Ray hadn't moved too quickly. Years of navigating her own fragile psyche had taught her the value of stillness. She simply leaned forward, offering a soft, welcoming smile that reached her tired eyes. Hello, Ray said softly, letting her voice ground the room. It is very nice to meet you, Toga-chan. There is plenty of tea if you would like some. From behind the silver hair, the blonde girl shifted, her throat bobbing as she offered a barely audible whisper. Hi. She is shy sometimes.
Eri explained seriously.
But she is really nice. And we do sister things together now. Sister things? Like sharing snacks, playing games, and protecting each other. Eri said it with the absolute certainty of someone explaining the most important rules of the universe. She spoke with such casual, heavy seriousness, as if protecting each other was the most natural, mandatory part of sisterhood. Ray's heart had clenched at that. These children, talking about protection like it was something they had to learn the hard way. Given what Ray understood about both girls' histories, it undoubtedly was. Now, an hour into the visit, both girls had relaxed considerably. Toga was still quieter than Eri, watching everything with careful attention, but she had slowly begun to join the conversation, even letting out a few small, genuine smiles. She sat close to Eri, as if staying tethered to her sister made this unfamiliar, peaceful world a little safer. Ray was pouring tea when Eri suddenly sat up straight, eyes wide with realization. Grandma, listen. Eri's voice carried that particular excitement of a child who'd just figured something out. I found out something amazing about my name. Oh, Ray set down the teapot, giving Eri her full, undivided attention. What is it, dear? Eri stood up, practically vibrating with pride. Beside her, Toga looked curious and encouraging, clearly supportive of whatever her sister was about to drop. Your name is Ray, right? Eri said very seriously. Yes, that's right. That's 3 letters. R-E-I. Eri counted on her tiny fingers, making sure to get it right. 1, 2, 3. Yes. Ray smiled, nodding along. And my name is Eri. Eri's smile was absolutely blinding. That's also 3 letters, and they're the same ones. E-R-I. Just, mixed up in a different order. She spread her arms wide, as if presenting the most profound discovery in human history. Isn't that super amazing? The pure, unfiltered joy radiating from the child was magnetic. Her eyes shone wide and bright, filled with an absolute, desperate delight in this simple, accidental connection. Ray had never once noticed it, nor had she ever thought to look for patterns in their names. But now, hearing it from Eri herself and speaking with such happiness, in the background, Togo was doing her own calculations, counting on her fingers, moving her lips silently. Then her eyes went wide too. It's true. Toga leaped up right alongside Eri, a massive, unburdened grin breaking across her face. That's so cool, Eri-chan. You're matching, right?
Eri beamed.
Both girls were bouncing on their heels now, holding hands and celebrating the alphabetical revelation. And Ray felt her heart melt completely. You are such a smart girl, Eri, Ray said softly, and her voice wavered just slightly. Both of you are incredibly clever, she wanted to ask. Every time Eri visited, the questions burned in her throat. Who are these children's parents? Why does this little girl come here to talk to someone like me? Are they friends of her children? The last relation is something clearly more accurate from her perspective, as her youngest brought oats that were given by Eri in the past. But just like every visit before, she let the questions dissolve. Maybe she was afraid of the answers, afraid that this fragile happiness would shatter if examined too closely. Or maybe she simply wanted to enjoy these moments without burdening them with difficult truths. So instead, she smiled at both girls and asked, "Would you like to help me arrange the rest of the flowers? The nurse brought in some beautiful lilies this morning." "Yes," both girls shouted in unison. Beyond the window, Stain sat on a bench with his arms crossed, ostensibly on guard duty. In reality, he was listening to the sounds of children laughing inside, and something in his chest that he had thought had died years ago stirred faintly. His hand rested on the blade at his side, not out of threat, but out of promise. Until he is alive, nobody would harm any of it. Not the little ones inside, not the fiercely stubborn students the boss was breaking and rebuilding at UA, and certainly not this fractured, fragile family that was trying to stitch itself back together. Stain's ideology of purging heroes who abandoned their duty was something that could never go away. But protecting people trying to become heroes, protecting a family trying to heal, that was a creed worth breathing for. The next day, first-year classes at UA began as usual, but there was a different energy in room 1A. A chattering excitement that came from genuine celebration rather than usual pre-class chaos. "Congratulations, Shinso!" Kirishima was practically vibrating against his desk. "Welcome to the hero course, man. It's official. You earned every bit of it." Yayarozu added, offering a warm, dignified smile from her seat. "Your tactical performance during the final exam was nothing short of exceptional." Shinso Hitoshi sat at what had been an empty desk since the first day of classes. Surrounded by the sudden barrage of attention, he looked slightly overwhelmed. His perpetually exhausted eyes still carried their signature dark circles, but the heavy, defensive cynicism that usually guarded his face had lifted. "Thanks," he muttered, his voice a little rough. For years, he had been conditioned to believe his quirk was a villain's tool, a liability to be feared. "I am honestly still trying to process the fact that I am actually sitting here." "Well, you better process it fast," Jiro joked, spinning a headphone jack around her finger with a grin. "Dabi-sensei doesn't give handouts, transfer students or not. You are in the meat grinder now." "I am aware." Shinso's lips twitched slightly. "Aizawa-sensei made sure I understood what I was signing up for." "Welcome to Class 1A." Ashido and Hagakure erupted in perfect, high-energy unison, having clearly rehearsed the welcoming committee routine the night before. The classroom dissolved into a chorus of laughter and a fresh wave of fist bumps, a seamless tide of acceptance washing over the new transfer. "Everyone, Ida stood abruptly, arms chopping in his characteristic manner. While I am pleased to welcome Shinso-kun to our class, the morning bell has struck. It is time to settle down. Homeroom will commence momentarily, and we must demonstrate the utmost decorum and… Ugh, you're such a buzzkill, class rep. Kaminari groaned, though he was already shuffling back to his designated desk. Late bummer. Classic Ida. A few more commented, though without real malice. Within moments, the class had settled. Students in their seats, attention forward, ready for instruction. As if on cue and exactly as Ida had predicted, the door slid open. Aizawa entered first, followed by DABI. Aizawa had been prepared to use his mandatory greeting. Sit down and shut up. You have 2 minutes to… But the words died in his throat. The students were already silently seated. Aizawa stopped dead in his tracks, a rare flicker of visible astonishment fracturing his usually deadpan expression. When did they get this organized? His dark eyes swept across the rows, executing a swift, instinctual head count. Every single seat was filled. Then his gaze caught on the desk that had sat empty since the first day. It wasn't empty anymore. Shinso sat there, alert, focused, and carrying himself with the quiet intensity of a boy who knew exactly what it cost to get through that door. For just a fraction of a second, Aizawa allowed himself to think. Maybe I was too hasty with my netta. The purple-haired student had been expelled on day 1 for behavior that Aizawa had deemed utterly incompatible with the standards of hero work. Specifically, a string of aggressive sexual harassment that had made multiple female classmates deeply uncomfortable during the initial quirk assessment test. At the time, it had been a swift, merciless call. And honestly, looking at how Class 1 had developed in the months since, their flawless cohesion, profound mutual respect, and the absolute lack of internal harassment issues, Aizawa knew he didn't actually regret it. No, he corrected himself firmly, his mental ledger snapping shut. I made the right choice. This class is infinitely better for it. He gave an imperceptible shake of his head, dismissing the unnecessary second-guessing. The next second, Aizawa's expression hardened into a distinctly disdainful, heavy-lidded glare. The exact look that made his students' survival instincts scream. I am sure you are all feeling incredibly proud of yourselves. He began. A perfect pass rate on the practical exams. Unprecedented historical results. I suppose you're all sitting there thinking you've mastered the fundamentals. Several students shifted uncomfortably. The warm, celebratory mood evaporated instantly. You haven't, Aizawa said, his dark eyes sweeping the rows. Which is precisely why the upcoming Forest Lodge training camp is going to be significantly harsher than anything you've experienced so far. Initially, he continued, the core curriculum was that students who failed the practical exam wouldn't attend the training camp. Several students who had barely passed let out a quiet, collective sigh of relief. However, since everyone passed, his tone suggested this was somehow disappointing. You will all be attending. Do not get comfortable. This camp will push your quirks harder than the sports festival and demand more endurance than the finals. Expect absolute hell. He reached down, pulling a thick stack of printed documents from his capture scarf, and began distributing them to the front row. These are your supply lists, training equipment you will need to survive the terrain. Many of these items are highly specialized and won't be available at your standard neighborhood convenience stores. You will need to visit the major commercial district in Kiyoshi Ward. I highly suggest going together as a class to ensure no one compromises the group by missing critical gear. The papers circulated quickly through the rows. Students began scanning the bullet points, their eyebrows creeping upward at some of the more unusual, high-grade specifications. 3 days from now, we depart at dawn. Be ready, Aizawa warned, his tone bringing absolutely no argument. Are there any questions? The moment Aizawa finished, excited chatter erupted, though students were careful to keep their volume reasonable. Some of this equipment is really specific, Yaoyorozu observed, scanning her list. Thermal regulation gear rated for extreme elemental spikes, specialized mountain-grade camping equipment. We should definitely head out as a group, Urarika suggested, turning around in her seat. A lot of these tactical stores are clustered in the same shopping mall district. We can split up into teams and help each other locate the trickier items. Plus, it will be a blast, Ashido added, her pink cheeks flushing with excitement. A total class shopping trip. Think of it as the ultimate bonding experience before the brutal training camp kills us all. I know some excellent specialty equipment stores, Tokoyami offered from the shadows of his desk, his arms crossed inside his uniform sleeves. Dark Shadow and I have conducted extensive wilderness training before. The darker corners of Waka District hold what we need. Shopping trip, Ashido chanted, and within seconds, a dozen students were already cross-referencing their cell phone calendars to coordinate schedules. At the front of the room, Aizawa watched the flurry of teenage organization with his usual exhausted expression, then glanced sideways at his colleague. DABI stood quietly, but there was something in his expression that Aizawa recognized. "What are you thinking about?" Aizawa asked, his voice low enough that students wouldn't hear. "Trying to come up with some weird plan to turn the world upside down again?" DABI gave a fake laugh. "Yeah, and this time around, it's going to be my best masterpiece." A chill ran down Aizawa's spine. He had worked alongside the man long enough to identify the exact energy DABI radiated when he was orchestrating something massive. The training camp attack preparations? That had the same energy. The sports festival modifications? Same look. Whatever DABI was plotting, it was going to be big. A part of Aizawa's hypervigilant nature wanted to demand details on the spot. He wanted to know exactly what kind of chaotic variable DABI was about to unleash upon their training camp. But he swallowed the question and looked away. With DABI, sometimes it was better not to know in advance. The man's strategies had a maddening habit of succeeding despite being utterly insane, and Aizawa had learned the hard way that trying to parse the logistics beforehand only left him with a migraine-tear headache. More than anyone, Aizawa understood him. On the surface, DABI looked calm, relaxed even, but underneath that composure was something volatile, a lit stick of dynamite waiting for the right spark. And recently, someone had touched his family. If anyone wanted to understand how furious he truly was, they only had to look at what remained of the people he had spoken to afterward. 9, Chimera, Slice, and Mummy. Unfortunately, none of them had provided useful information. Or more accurately, they hadn't possessed any worth giving in the first place. That had made things worse. If they had known something valuable, they might at least have retained some use. Their ignorance only sealed their fate in DABI's hands. It was something Aizawa still tried very hard not to remember. Meanwhile, the masterpiece DABI was referring to, however, had absolutely nothing to do with the training camp itself. It was about what would happen in the commercial district. According to the plot, DABI knew the League of Villains leader, Tamura Shigaraki, would have his first one-on-one with Midoriya during the shopping, which means DABI thought it was the perfect opportunity for him. He also had some things to settle with him for sending certain guests to his residence when he wasn't home. It was time for payback, and this time he wasn't going to hold back. The League wanted to test the UAS defenses, and more importantly, they dared to lay hands on his family? Fine. Let them come to the commercial district, make their move, and think they were the predators. DABI would be waiting, and when the smoke cleared, the League of Villains would understand with absolute, agonizing clarity why targeting his students and his family was the worst and final mistake they would ever make. The smile that crossed his face, devoid of any warmth. Beside him, Aizawa noticed it immediately. Yeah, Aizawa thought. Definitely don't want to know what he's planning. In the classroom, students continued discussing their upcoming shopping trip with innocent enthusiasm. completely unaware that their teachers were silently preparing for war. "This is going to be fun," Uraraka said cheerfully. Aizawa and Dabi exchanged a glance. "Fun?" Aizawa thought dryly. "Sure, that's one word for it."
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going. Plus, it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.